Good evening and welcome, everyone. It's 5:30 p.m. on Wednesday, March 27, 2024, and this special meeting of the Sandpoint City Council is now called to order in council chambers at 1123 West Lake Street, Sandpoint, Idaho. For the record, I am Mayor Jeremy Grimm presiding. Also present are Council President Jason Welker, Councilors Deb Rule, Joel Laspiro, Justin Dick, Kyle Schreiber, and Pam Duquette. Under the city's adopted code of ethics and civility, as the presiding officer, I'm to identify law enforcement personnel in the room who will be serving as sergeant at arms for this evening's meeting. Tonight, we have Police Chief Corey Kuhn in the back. Just briefly, before we proceed, I would like to take this opportunity to make everyone aware that the city does have a policy on public meeting decorum. These rules are posted in the chamber at the entrance doors. In summary, I would ask that those participating in our meeting this evening, please be pleasant and respectful, not make derogatory statements about others, including city staff, and not be boisterous or disruptive. Please no calling out, clapping, or holding up signs, or cheering or booing. Next, if everyone please stand, we'll recite the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. During the recent meeting on February 21st, 2024, the City Council directed the scheduling of a special meeting for the purpose of a specific focus on Sandpoint's continued participation in the Joint Powers Agreement for the coordinated and cooperative provision of fire service in the City of Sandpoint, Sago Fire District, and Westside Fire District. That meeting was scheduled for this evening. As directed by council, written documentation has been provided in the meeting packet with materials submitted by Sago and Westside Fire Districts, along with my letter and materials. When the council scheduled this meeting, it was understood that the desire was for city staff to present this information in a succinct order and that a workshop style meeting was not desired. I did receive a request from the chairs of the Westside and Sago boards. Thank you. For Deputy Fire Chief Jeff Armstrong to act as their representative to present materials they submitted in the packet. I am agreeable to allowing this, and I am willing to provide additional time for this presentation beyond the 3-minute time period allocated for public comments, unless the council objects. Hearing none?
None from me.
An opportunity for public comment will be provided following the presentations and council discussion. If you wish to speak, please complete a sign-up form ahead of time and hand it to staff in the back of the room. The forms are available at the entrance. For those attending remotely, when I have announced the opportunity for public comment, you may raise your hand on Zoom at that time. I will begin with a review of my letter that was included in the packet, and then we will move on to Deputy Chief Armstrong to make a presentation, and then we will provide an opportunity for public comment, and then there will be time for council to discuss and decide on what they want to do. So if you haven't had the opportunity to read the document that's up on the screen here, I received correspondence on March 15, 2024 from the chairpersons of Westside and Sago Fire District, including a statement that said, amongst others, Sago and Westside Fire Districts are preparing to move on to a more enhanced model, specifically one similar to a fire authority. On March 18th, I responded by email to clarify to Chairperson Deck and Lewis, requesting, in part, will you not be continuing the current JPA model? On March 19th, Chairman Deck responded as up on the screen. Geraldine and I have spoken, and we are in agreement that the answer to your two assumptions is yes. So based on what I think and thought was fairly clear communication, I just want to bring up a couple of other things. Madam Clerk, could you bring up that presentation that I sent you? Thank you so much. And I don't know if you can make that full screen, that probably, if you go up under view somewhere, maybe menu will view full screen up left. That work, excellent. All right, so can you go down to the next page, please? Oh, perfect. So before we start, I just want to say a couple things. One, this, in my opinion, this isn't a straightforward decision. Where I sit as the mayor is different than where I sit as a friend and where I sit as a Bonner County resident. But I want to just bring up some historical facts and just some recognition that comparing the city of Sandpoint to Sagal and West Side is, as the screen shows, like comparing apples to oranges. The people there are my hopes that whatever the outcome of tonight is, that we can figure out a way to work together to support everyone. But I also want the audience and the public to understand that as the executive of the city's Sandpoint, my number one focus is on the city residents and the city budget and the city's finances. And unlike everyone in the room, I assume tonight is thinking about one thing, I have the luxury of thinking, and the staff here of thinking about 12 different things, whether it's the water plant, the wastewater plant, our roads, our land use laws, our litigation, our impact fees, our stormwater, our police. So with due respect, I would just ask you to understand that this is not my whole life, fire and EMS and rescue. It is one portion of a very full plate. So I also want to just say, I appreciate your time. I respect and value every firefighter who puts their life on the line, who goes to great lengths, who personally, I'm probably sitting in this chair tonight because of the help and friendship that you provided me during the election. So with that, I hope you understand that I'm balancing a lot here. Next slide, please. Just from a little demographic perspective, what we have on your left, my right, left is Sagal and the approximate boundaries of the Sagal Fire District, and the right is the city of Sandpoint. So we have a pretty similar population. One of the many differences is our daytime population in Sandpoint is more than double the daytime population in the Sagal Fire District. Down in the center, you can see insurance rates are much higher in the Sagal District, $913 a year on average versus $542 in Sandpoint. And you own a lot more dogs, per person. Next slide. When you look at the population density, just look, the Sagal Fire District's 49 people per square mile, whereas Sandpoint's over 2,000 residents per square mile. Next slide. Looking at response time and response to an incident, if you go to the extent of the Sagal District, you're looking at 25 miles to the new development down at Camp Bay. 25 minutes, 13 miles. I'm sure you drive faster. Next slide. If you look to the west, maybe 21 minutes down to the western border of the district. Next slide. It's about 7 or 8 minutes according to Google Map to the north of Sandpoint from this station. Jumping back to the origin of this, July 23rd, 2014, the city of Sandpoint was approached by the Sagal Fire District, according to the minutes in this resolution, and that at the time they were currently without a fire chief and requested the Sandpoint fire chief to assume command of the district. Next slide. In that first resolution, there was the aspiration that, and this is a few months after it, that there was more efficient operations and stations were covered with more volunteers, which isn't the case today. And there was also the aspiration that there will be an opportunity to obtain data demonstrating cost savings. So this initial step into the JPA, what evolved in the JPA was a request by Sagal, according to the record I found, because you were without a chief after a very litigious workplace issue. Next slide. In that, Shannon Scythe, our finance director at the time, put in the budget almost $28,000 to look at a feasibility study, which I believe rolled into the Fitch study that many of you are familiar with. Next slide. So the intent, as far as I can tell, that this was a trial and exploration. It was a request by Sagal Fire District to share a chief to manage operations. Its stated purpose was to increase operational efficiency, administrative efficiencies, and cost savings. Further along, the JPA was expanded, including West Side, and more recently, amendments to the district employees becoming Sandpoint employees. My observations going into this are that we have lost autonomy as a city, as the mayor, not as Jeremy, the resident. Autonomy is so important. The fact that 6 people can gather in a day to have a special meeting and make any decision for our residents without anyone else telling us what to do or having to inquire or engage with anyone else, in my mind, is one of the most sacred things of local representation. It is critical in my mind that this city maintains autonomy. Second, the management has become very complex. I work with our staff at City Hall every day. I am facing a large gap in staffing. I see my finance and HR director spending a significant amount of their capacity that is backfilled, but paid, but not filled in terms of times and hours available for me to utilize them for the betterment of Sandpoint residents attending to JPA-related matters. In addition, the complexity outside of what is reimbursed, I have been in at least 50 hours of meetings with 5 people around me discussing the JPA in the last 3 months. None of that time is compensated for. It's just the complexity of having to deal with an element of the city. So when I say it erodes our organizational capacity, I don't have the full horsepower of the engine that I want to run the city of Sandpoint. Liability and exposure. Beyond ICRIMP coverage, if a tragedy were to occur, with 24 employees traveling versus the 9 that would be under the current setup as a Sandpoint Fire Department, like we operated for decades, we've got more liability of a bad thing happening across the districts, whether it's a backing up over somebody or some other issue that's not covered by ICRIMP. It's just an exposure, and when I look at the company or the corporation of Sandpoint, it expands our exposure. Under the current model, I feel that there's some limitations on our negotiation with the CBA because inherently we have to address the other 2 entities that are part of this, and what the city of Sandpoint might be able to do with our firefighters may and could be constrained by what other entities have the fiscal capability to do. As I mentioned, the county is the county, the city is the city. I could go on at length of how we're different, but we have different priorities and we serve different needs. Based on what I've seen, the level of staffing outside the city in the other districts has some challenges. I know that there's efforts for moving forward to address that with a potential levy. And as I mentioned before, this is not my sole focus like it is for the 2 boards and the people who represent those boards here tonight. This is one of dozens of issues that the city of Sandpoint has to deal with. And I don't mean that to diminish it. It's just a reality of there's only so much time in the day, and I'm spending most of my waking hours working on this, and there's not a lot of time to add additional tasks and meetings and investigations of past. So I'm looking for simplicity. Now, I bring all this up not because my mind's set up. I just want to put forward to anyone who's going to speak tonight what my perception is, and it's probably more for me just to help you understand where I'm at. And I'm happy to, if I'm wrong or these assumptions are incorrect, I wanted to do this on the front so you have the ability to correct me and change my mind in the event that I have to vote tonight, which I don't know if I will. So with that, thank you for your patience there. At this point, I would like to invite Deputy Chief Armstrong to the podium to represent Sagal and Westside in reviewing the materials that were submitted by the districts. Thank you so much, Deputy Chief.
Good evening, Mayor, Council, members of the public behind me, and those joining on Zoom. Going in tonight, I wasn't quite sure what the format was going to be, so I had prepared about a 1.5-minute statement as your operations chief. And then I'm prepared to talk kind of on the material that was submitted. If it's all right, I'd like to do both.
Absolutely.
Okay. So I'd like to start with my statement as your operations chief. So as your operations chief, I just wanted to give you a couple things to consider. First one is data. Data in this region is lacking in really solid data analysis, especially over the long term, over the last few years, specifically with regard to our fire department and its capabilities and community risk. The implications of withdrawal from the JPA are not fully understood. But on the other side of the issue, neither are the implications of staying in. What I try to do is I try to make sure that my decisions are data influenced, not data driven. Let me explain that. Data driven decisions tend to only look at statistical analysis, while data influenced decisions take that analysis and use it as a starting point and then incorporate human insights and creative problem solving. So let me give you an example of that. Let's talk about the city's ladder truck. A data driven decision would tell us that we don't need that ladder truck. And that's based on incident data and how often it's been used and its direct impact on the outcome of those incidents. However, a data influenced decision will show you that that ladder truck might save a life in the future, and it also makes the jobs of the firefighters safer and easier. Using the same approach, it wouldn't be difficult to determine the operational impacts of the JPA on our incidents and determine if they can be mitigated more quickly and more safely with more available resources. The district's desire to move to a new model, whether that be a fire authority or an enhanced JPA that operates as a fire authority. Those options are currently being studied, and this evaluation is long overdue. Those options are, I'm sorry, I lost my place. I also have some discussions around the state with some folks through Idaho chiefs regarding mergers, forming new districts, and other solutions that require voter approval. Not only do those take a long time, many years, but I don't know if we sit in a political climate to ask somebody for a new taxing district. Meanwhile, I would suggest that we engage into a deep dive into the data as well as exploration of community risk, which is a more data influenced look at the community needs of Sandpoint. It has been my experience that cities under 25,000 struggle to provide adequate public safety without significant assistance from outside. Before we decide to reduce our resources anecdotally, let's gain a better understanding of what's needed to protect Sandpoint. If you're good with it, I'll transition into the PowerPoint that was prepared. I don't know if we have it available, or otherwise I can just refer to my notes and
I
follow.
believe we do.
Okay. And I'll just open, as we say, the first couple slides I'll probably fly through really quickly ad nauseum. I think we've been through some of these details. We've talked about them. I know City Council is very aware, and especially the mayor, having spent a lot of time researching this. If we could go to slide 3, please. I'll skip the background slide because you basically summarize that for us, Mayor. So in looking at this from the district's perspective, and what's not interesting about being the ops chief for Selkirk is I have 3 fire departments that I work for. And so in looking at this, I think it's been beneficial operationally and financially. I'm going to stay out of the financial world, and I'm just going to focus on the operational world tonight. The more recent move to move employees all employees under one employer, which was a city, has proven to be beneficial to the organization. I think it's streamlined things. However, it's challenging to the districts for that loss of control and loss of influence. The mayor just mentioned, and I was making some notes while you talked, the mayor mentioned the liability. And I would just go back to, that was what the city had wanted. That's my historical knowledge and the research that I've been able to. Prior to that, everybody had their own employees and we can move them around, move resources. But the city wanted to move everybody under, which did increase the burden on the city. Right now, the region operates as one fire department, allowing for strategic move-ups, covers, standardization, rapid incident mitigation, overlapping incidents. You know, there's a lot I could say here, and I don't want to just read a PowerPoint. You mentioned staffing issues, and again, I was making notes. You mentioned staffing issues in the district. As your operations chief, I would sit here and tell you that we have staffing issues in the city of Sandpoint. We have significant community risk, and we have 2 firefighters on a day at times. Oftentimes we have 3, but probably the majority of the time, over 50%, we have 2. That's outside my comfort level, especially not knowing that I control the rest of the resources outside the city. You mentioned the daytime population. The daytime population probably for Sagal probably drops during the day. It increases in Sandpoint. And so we're able to adjust our resources and deal with that risk and deal with those increased call volume. Next slide, please. This is just a really good, I didn't mean to bark that at you, sorry. This is just a real good look at incidents over the last 3 years. There were some outliers in the individual years, and there was also some changes with regard to going to ILS medicals versus ALS medicals. And then, of course, in the middle of this, we had COVID. So there's some outliers, and there's some interesting things that we could look and dive deep into the data with. But I figured just a good glimpse of 3 years of data. So Sandpoint leads with the call volume. And then obviously for the organizations that are not in the JPA, those calls are considered mutual aid, but I wanted to put them up there anyway because we are tracking them. Next slide, please. So this is another thing we can look at in our records management. And it's overlapping calls. And this is parameters that you can set in your records management. You can say how many calls within 30 minutes. And that's what we did here is we're looking at if 2 calls happen within 30 minutes, we're calling those overlapping calls. We can break it down even farther or closer if we want, or we can spread it out over time. So you had 338 in the city of Sandpoint overlapping calls. Now, I'm not saying that mutual aid or automatic aid won't help those, but if those are low-level calls, at some point your partners in the future are going to wonder if they should be coming into city of Sandpoint to run those calls. Certainly they will be there for fires, but as you can see, there's a call volume issue there that you need to be aware of.
And
Next slide, please.
Chief, can I interrupt you just for a second?
Absolutely.
That's that same period though, that included COVID and related. Were we still doing the dual roll into EMS calls at that period?
Chief would have to tell me when we made the ILS switch. I don't remember when that was, but you're right. Yeah, again, I went out to 3 years just because there's too many anomalies. Next slide, please. This is just a real quick visual. Obviously, this is more of an emotional slide, right? It shows the call volume over the last, it shows firefighters on duty and the population. And obviously you see that the firefighters aren't keeping up with the population. That's a system-wide issue. That isn't necessarily a Sandpoint issue. I haven't tracked the Sandpoint population. Next slide, please. This one is a little bit more on the financial side, and specifically talked about the sliders, the reimbursement that was coming in. I know the sliders is viewed as a negative, and I know as your ops chief, I would prefer not to move anyone out of Sandpoint. I would love to see 3 firefighters on a day here. I would actually love to see 5 firefighters on a day here in Sandpoint. But it's something that was in place. I think both Chief Gilcrease and I inherited it, and it was a practice. And so we just kind of go over that a little bit in this slide, as well as some of the financial contribution to the city that the districts are paying for the administrative functions. And in this last bullet point, and I will stand here and tell you anecdotally, because I don't have solid data, but looking around the city of Sandpoint, it has the greatest community risk. And we talk about that. We talk about potential. We talk about potential for life loss, potential for firefighter injury, mitigating these incidents. And right now, the city of Sandpoint leverages a much larger fire department than they would leverage on their own. Next slide, please. And we can we can pop past this. This was kind of just an analysis of the 24-hour shifts and the financials reimbursement that came back into the city for that. We go to the next one. Perfect. So I think there's some things on this slide that all organizations agree to. Certainly administrative functions have become cumbersome. I used to tell people that fire departments are special. I realize that I probably should be saying fire departments are different. We are definitely time consuming. We definitely can take up a lot of HR time. We can take up a lot of payrolls time. The reality is that we're here 24/7, 365. Majority of employees are working 8-hour days, and when they go home at night, the firefighters are still here. So with that comes some additional burden of being staffed 24/7, 365. I think one of the big ones for the districts is the city's influence. And I think a lot of that comes with the movement of employees under the city. I think at that point, and the financials under the city, I think at that point, the district started feeling disconnected from their organization and feeling like they didn't have as much influence. And then the last bullet point is, the Fitch study mentioned what we call the Fitch study, which is the Shared Fire Services Assessment, mentioned an enhanced JPA and options for the future and what those look like. And I think you hear fire authority thrown around, and I think there's a lot of work that we need to do to make sure we find out if that's even possible. And I know Councilmember Rules said, I'm waiting for a champion for that. And a little light went on the back of my head. And I worked with the fire chief to say, can I start investigating this? Can I start looking into this? I don't even know if it's possible under Idaho law, but if nobody's asked a question, how do we know? And if it isn't, or if it's unclear, can we start having conversations with Boise? Because certainly local government getting together to streamline, to provide better level of service, to save the taxpayers money should be something that maybe resonates in Boise. So I think that's where you're seeing my standing up here today to talk to you, not advocating for the districts, but maybe representing for the districts, that this is the direction they want to move. And I will mention, they want to move that way with the city of Sandpoint. Next slide, please.
Mr. Mayor, Jeff, or Deputy Chief, if you don't mind clarifying your last point there, what way would they like to see the city of Sandpoint move again? Could you clarify that?
Forward
services agreement.
Forward with them an enhanced JPA or a fire authority.
An enhanced JPA or a fire authority.
Correct. And you can enhance the JPA to operate like a fire authority, and maybe it's not defined under Idaho law as a fire authority, but you can set the structure up so it meets all the same things that the stakeholders want it to meet.
So you're confident that you're speaking for all of the Selkirk firefighters when you make that statement, or is that?
I don't know that I'm speaking for the firefighters, but I can tell you that I believe that I have the support of the board based on the directions I have, the boards of the districts.
The boards of the two districts.
Yes.
Okay. Thank you.
I think the email and the response and some of the communication back and forth to the mayor, we lose so much in email. And I think that we didn't have the second workshop because the workshop was difficult. It was difficult to manage. You were herding cats, and I understand, but we didn't have those conversations. And I think there was a lot lost in translation, and the conversations I've had with the boards are, they want Sandpoint to be a part of this.
So if I can ask a follow-up, are you saying confidently that's the preferred model to the current JPA model for the districts?
A fire authority?
Fire authority.
Yes. And if we can't do a fire authority as others in other states would define it, they would like to bring those components into an enhanced JPA.
Maybe we can discuss this later, Mr. Mayor. So just tell me if you prefer that, but can you define a fire authority for the public who might not be familiar with how that compares to the joint powers agreement as it exists today?
That really should have been in my PowerPoint.
Thank you. I just know, because this is something I've had to
Right.
learn in the last few months. And I know members of the public, many of whom are watching tonight, are going to be reading about this tomorrow, may say, well, aren't we in a fire authority? What is the difference between a fire authority and a joint powers agreement, just for the public?
Absolutely. So a fire authority, and you will see them in other states actually called out in the Idaho code, but a fire authority is a separate legal entity that has provided all the same legal rights and legal protections under the law as a local fire department would be, whether that be a fire district or whether that be a city fire department. What we need to be able to figure out is, can we form that entity, establish a governing board, and then you have the 3 jurisdictions that pay a membership fee into that based on the level of service they want for their community, have representatives on the board. As I start doing this, it sounds really similar to a JPA, but the reality is that that fire authority becomes the fire department. And Then you have the employees employed by that fire authority. You have the finances managed by that fire authority. The insurance is managed by that fire authority, the benefits, the retirement. And those are the questions we have to ask.
So you say they pay in based on the level of service they desire for their community. A challenge I understand to exist in that such situation is, what if one of the jurisdictions desires for a higher level of service for their community, but the other two are unable to provide that level of service financially for their communities? How is it possible for Sandpoint, let's say, to increase our staffing from 9 to 12 or from 9 to 15, like you desired, having 4 or 5 firefighters on duty, if Sagal and Westside are unable to meet that financial obligation? Can we unilaterally ask the fire authority to say, hey, look, we want shifts of 4 firefighters, even though Sagal and Westside can't afford that right now? Because under the current JPA, we have 1 fire department. Sandpoint is actually hindered from growing our level of service locally because we just know Sagal and Westside at present, without further levies, are not able to match that increased commitment to fire service.
So I would argue that you could, if you wanted to hire additional firefighters and go to 5-person staffing in the city of Sandpoint, maintain that 24/7, 365, you could do that now. And that would not affect the level of service in Sagal. Sagal would determine their level of service and pay for their allocated positions, and they would determine whether they will fund the overtime to fill that 24/7. Because an example right now, somebody takes off from the Carywood station, they drop to 1 person. That's a different level of service in the city of Sandpoint. So without getting too far into the weeds, the agreements that I've read is, and an example of one that I researched was Unified Fire in Utah, and it's in the low 20s, 22 or 23 different entities paying into Unified Fire Authority, and different organizations, whether they be cities or fire districts that are paying into this, are determining what the level of service are in their community. So if they want 2 people on a fire engine and they want that staff 24/7, that fire authority tells them what that's going to cost. That's going to cost X amount for the employees, and it's going to be $150,000 for overtime based on the available leave balances, a methodology and overtime study. And that is the price that they get. If there's an anomaly, someone gets hurt, an issue happens, they have to backfill, then they meet at mid-year budget, or they send them a budget addendum and say you owe additional for overtime, or you can make the decision to reduce the level of staffing. Am I answering your question?
Yeah, I've been told many times and corrected many times that under the JPA, we don't have, it's 1 fire service. There are 20, fully staffed, we'd have 27 firefighters serving Westside, Sagal, and Sandpoint. It doesn't seem under the current model, there's an opportunity for Sandpoint to grow its level of service because our firefighters are Sagal firefighters. They are Westside firefighters. There are no Sandpoint firefighters right now. And we know daily that almost daily, we are staffed lower in Sandpoint because of the shortfalls in staffing in the rural districts. So we are sending Sandpoint firefighters to Carywood and to Renco on a very regular basis at this point.
But you don't have to be doing that.
So if we were to desire to grow our local fire service staff, we'll still face a situation where we're making up for shortfalls at rural fire stations. And yes, we are getting paid. I'm always reminded that where money flows into Sandpoint when firefighters flow out. But our very small community of 4.7 square miles experiences a diminished rapid response level of service when we're constantly filling vacant seats in rural stations 20 miles from town.
So I don't want to tell you that you're wrong, but I want to tell you that I think we're not. I think that we're looking this incorrectly.
The audience
Westside is staffing with 1 firefighter a day. That is their level of service. Previously, they wouldn't backfill with overtime because they didn't have the funds. Now, whether it's the last couple of years, whatever it is, they fill that 24/7 and they fund the overtime when there's a vacancy, an injury, what have you. Sandpoint could do the same thing, and I would have to get into the nitty-gritty of the financials, which isn't my area of expertise, but I can tell you there's a way to do it, and perhaps the way to do it is actually to enhance the JPA so that you call out the level of service as the city of Sandpoint of what you want to provide, and we never drop below that. It doesn't mean that one of your firefighters on his day off couldn't go work overtime in Sagal, but what you don't want to do is I want 5 firefighters on a day, and that's what we want, and then we budget accordingly. With that comes increased overtime. But you have Westside running with 1 firefighter and you have Sandpoint running with 3 firefighters. And so you have that difference in level of staffing right now as it exists. The only thing is we got into this bad habit, and I'm going to call it a bad habit, of sending a firefighter to Sagal, probably to help them out, probably also to create some revenue for the city. and drop to a level of 2-person staffing, which I guess was the acceptable level for Sandpoint. And I can't speak on that decision because I wasn't here when that practice started. And if something in the JPA is convoluted when it comes to that, or if the financial formula is not set up correctly, then that's even more reason to enhance the JPA, to call that out, to actually have Appendix A, Sandpoint, Appendix B, Sagal, Appendix C, West Side, and everybody can pick what their level of service is. So I really don't want to tell you you're wrong, but on the other hand, I think you might have been given some bad information.
And just to interrupt briefly, this portion of the meeting, I would prefer if we don't get into debate and just more questions.
Sure, I'll keep it to questions.
Just to keep the flow going pretty well.
Thank you, though, for defining the providing that distinction between the agreement and the authority. I did want members of the public to be able to understand that.
Mr. Mayor, do you mind?
Go ahead, Councilman Dick.
Deputy Chief Armstrong, we heard Councilor Welker talk about it as well, and we've heard it. Can you show us, go back to the revenue slide on what we're bringing in? I believe it had the sliders on there. And maybe you could take us through that. I'm not sure the public is aware. We kind of got into the sliders coming from Sandpoint going to Sagal or vice versa. But I don't know how much we got into. What are those values? What is that revenue coming back into Sandpoint if we send firefighters out to Sagal? What is Sagal paying back? What are we paying for the shared finance director, for our human resources, for our IT? You know, what might we be losing revenue wise by getting out of the JPA?
Councilman Dick, I believe our finance officer can provide, Sarah can provide a summary, a ballpark figure on what that would be. There is a direct cost to us if we were to decouple. Is Sarah in the room? Sarah, would you mind just giving us a ballpark? I know it gets complex with hours and other things, but and unaccounted for hours.
Yeah, so it varies. So it depends on what you look at, of course. But if you look at just the hard numbers at the bottom of the line, it is 75,000. Most of that is salaried employees. So that is their time that is spent over and above their regular work hours. I don't know how to explain this. I think I've explained it to you guys before, so I don't know what more you want. The details are going into that, but that is the majority of that is going to be like my time that's spent over and above regular work hours doing that. And then HR's time is salary time.
I think Justin's asking about specifically for those 94 24-hour days that Sandpoint over the last 2 years sent Sandpoint, should say firefighters assigned to the Sandpoint station to either Sagal or West Side. What kind of revenue comes in from that specifically, not for the administrative side?
So it doesn't come in, it just isn't billed. So if that makes sense. So we have all the firefighters on the books, and then whatever is they use of those, then that is what is billed to them. So it's not like they're giving us money ever. They're never giving us money. It's just not billed as much as it would be billed if they were using all of their revenue, like all of the employees.
Okay, and Mr. Mayor, if I might, how long have we been keeping data on the sliders? I mean, Deputy Armstrong talked about data influence versus data decision-making. How long have we been keeping data on the sliding of employees back and forth between different fire stations?
So when did we start that? I mean, internally from a finance standpoint, we do the books behind the scenes. Now actually doing that is whenever it was started. I think it was back in 22.
It was in the middle. Yeah. So it was basically last fiscal year is
Okay.
when we ran that. It came up at one of the JPA meetings. They wanted a kind of a high level staffing study. So we did that, and that's what came of it. We don't track it on the daily. I mean, we can always go back and pull that data, but we did it specifically for that request from the JPA board.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Sarah. Sorry to interrupt you.
No, that's absolutely perfectly fine. I just feel like I'm taking up your whole evening. So let me explain what I did here then. I don't want to get into Sarah's world because Sarah's world is the chief's world. But what we did is we looked at because we talked about the sliders, we looked at, and I don't know where this 48,604, whether it's just not billed or whether it's billed and comes back to the city. I don't know. But what I'm trying to articulate here is that the potential cost savings for the city, if you move someone, obviously Sagel's picking up that salary. So, how we do it behind the scenes, I don't know. So that was what I was trying to show here, working with the districts to do this. And yes, Mayor, I did take your slide and embed it because we were trying to look at the mayor's presentation to understand some of what are the concerns of the city? What are the things that we can either address, talk about, or fix? Was there anything? I don't think I'm the subject matter expert on the financials. So anything else on that, or?
I had two questions for you if you're done your presentation, but
I've got a couple more slides, but go ahead.
you had mentioned two things that raised my eyebrows. You had said that Sandpoint's not staffed at levels that you would consider optimal. If we had our 9 full-time firefighters on staff with some volunteers, would that, in your opinion, provide us with sufficient staffing for our community?
We would have to have a conversation about volunteers because I really question whether we can get the true traditional volunteers and the volunteer force that you guys had 10 years ago.
North Side has volunteers, right? Paid
I think the
volunteers?
answers are coming behind me. They have people on the books.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And you have
It's a
people that show up for training.
part-time-
Right.
Part-time job, yeah.
I think the volunteers that you're looking for are the people when the tones come off, you come down here and there's 3 people getting on a fire engine and they're going to an incident or they're covering the city while your resources leave. I think there's a lot of things going on in the world that's making that harder. Our training, our time requirements are getting higher and our standards are moving up and people's lives are busier. People have families.
Yeah.
Most married couples or both are working. So we would have to have a conversation about that. Someone will sit up here and fire chiefs will sit up here and beat the drum all day long on NFPA. The reality is we're never going to meet the NFPA numbers. We aren't. So what we have to start looking at is what the community standard is and what is it that we want to achieve with those firefighters when they first arrive on scene. And I always use the Baxter's basement as an example because it's one of the first places I went when I came up here exploring the job. And as I walked around Sandpoint, I went, oh no. As a firefighter, right? I looked at the old buildings. So Baxter's basement, I would have to look at what do I need to show up in the first 5 to 10 minutes to be able to go inside that building to save property, to save lives. Probably not going to be anybody in the basement of Baxter's, but let's talk about some of the residential over commercial on Front Street. Front Street. Did I just say the wrong street? I'm showing my lack of experience. I'm sorry.
I
Anyway,
had one other question.
Yeah, so-
You had mentioned that, you know, if we decouple that Sandpoint's at the greatest risk for level of service, and I assume that's based on our current staffing, but with the 9, I assume we would have sufficient staffing and coverage. And then with the mutual or automatic aid, beyond the delay in response for large incidents, am I misunderstanding how mutual and automatic aid work, that we would still receive support from our neighbors, just like we would give support to our neighbors?
You would. So roll back to my example of a building downtown, looking at what you want to accomplish when you get there. Everybody's probably heard 2 in, 2 out. If you haven't, it means there's 2 firefighters have to be outside for 2 firefighters to go in. We have to start looking at the tasks that need to be done. And so when I say that 3 isn't sufficient and isn't at my comfort level, it's because I'm with 3 people, I'm not going to be able to accomplish what I need to accomplish in the first few minutes. You are correct. Right now, as it stands, mutual and automatic aid, everybody is working together. I would like to even see that enhanced to boundary drop. But the reality is those are just agreements. Those agreements have to be renewed. Those agreements can be modified. And if Sandpoint stands up its own fire department and wants to put on 10 firefighters a day for a total of 30 and wants to staff 2, a truck company and an engine company, then by all means, they are going to build a bigger, better, stronger, and more expensive fire department. But my concern is that we're making a decision now that's going to affect things 20 years from now. And as other leadership comes into the organization, they may feel differently about that. They may say, well, Sandpoint, you can give me 1 engine, so I can give you 1 engine. Because maybe at some point, the districts do join and they are one organization, and now you're negotiating mutual aid with one organization. So those are the two things that I fear, and I've had this conversation with Chief Gilcrease. I said, what if we're gone and there's people that don't get along, right? Because we know that as soon as you separate, things can regress, people can start drifting in different directions, have different visions. And I think that's the one thing you have right now is you have one leadership, one vision, and it holds us all together. Did I answer your question?
You did. Thank you.
Okay.
Mr. Mayor,
Go ahead, Councilwoman Duquette.
I just want to understand and let everybody understand that 9 firefighters doesn't mean 9 on duty
Right.
at one time. So you've actually got just 3 on duty. And you're saying 2 go out and 1 is left, and that's not sufficient, not efficient, not safe.
Correct.
Okay,
And I may
that's fine.
have misspoke. My apologies.
No, you did not. I know when we keep saying we have 9 firefighters, they're not sitting here ready to go on a call, is what I'm just.
Correct.
Wanting to make clear.
Currently, the staffing is 3. Ideally, it would be 4. You'd be able to make that initial entry into a burning building. It'd be great to be able to have 5 because now you have somebody that can watch the pump panel. Be ideal to have a second engine coming right away so you can hook into a sprinkler system. This is where we get into nitty gritty, and I will bore you with fire department tactics, and I don't want to do that.
And can I just ask you to clarify frequently right now, although we technically have 9 positions for the city under the original allocation, frequently we are not running with 3 because one of those is sliding 94 days a year to some other station. Is that correct?
Sliding or off. When they're off, we don't backfill either.
Right. Thank you.
There's a slide that starts with, is mutual aid enough? And I think that's where we had left off. And I will try to speed this up. So there was a couple things that you said, Mayor, in your presentation, and I watched the YouTube video a couple times and saw the back of my head. It was really weird. What is a return on investment? And you were talking about the area and the land, and you're approaching it, you're a land use guy, and you're approaching it from a land use perspective. I can tell you the fires burn the same in Sagal as they burn in Sandpoint. I would be more concerned about the fires in Sandpoint just because of the economic impacts, the loss, and the potential threat to life safety. You talked also a little bit about response times, and I wrote that down because when you said that, I almost feel like we're starting to talk about how we shouldn't be sending the Sandpoint engine out to Sagal. And so in my mind, I'm going, well, are they not going to provide mutual aid? Because if you don't provide mutual aid to Sagal, Sagal's not going to provide mutual aid to City of Sandpoint. I'm not saying that they won't do the right thing, but I'm saying there has to be that conversation at some point. Hey, we can't come one way over the bridge and you never come south over the bridge. So I just wanted to make sure I was writing notes as you were talking. And then autonomy, that is a positive for the city, right? You can have Sandpoint down the side of your fire engines again. Although the reality is with an enhanced JPA or a fire authority, your fire engines can be purple and they can say whatever you want on the side of them because you would control your resources and make those decisions. Autonomy is a little bit more expensive. You can set your own standards. I think you can still do that as part of regional, but there is a certain level of community pride that goes into that. And in the regionalization efforts that I've done, I've watched people really fight for that pride, but then small fire departments and small communities realizing that they can't afford it anymore. And that becomes difficult to deal with. And I know the autonomy and the pride of having your own fire department is tough for some communities. You mentioned the Fitch study. We all talk about it. I'm going to make some bold statements. I think the Fitch study is old. I don't think the Fitch study looked at a lot of things that we should be looking at, specifically community risk. I have looked at quite a few fire department studies. I'm not an expert by any means, but in 25 years in the fire service, I've been exposed to a thing or two. And when I read the Fitch study before I even got here, there were some things that jumped out at me that I just feel like they didn't really dive into. And then specifically the statement that, Sandpoint, it almost feels like they're saying Sandpoint benefits the least from it, but I think they benefit financially the least from it. And we kind of go back into those data-driven and data-influenced. If the city was hemorrhaging money into the districts, absolutely have a conversation. But if it's close to it a wash, then let's look at what we're gaining on the operational side of things to see what the benefit would be. Next slide, please. I promise I'm almost done.
Can you, before you jump into
Yeah.
that, I just want to touch on something you just said on that slide. You referenced that the city's at greatest risk. The International Fire Code, that governs how structures are built? And in your opinion, does that reduce the risk of fire and spreading fire and safety of firefighters and all that stuff?
So the international codes are reactive. So they respond to things that have happened in the past. And so anecdotally, my statement was anecdotal as well, right? But it's just sometimes when you've been in the fire service, you have a gut feeling about things. So I do believe that they prevent future things and they do make conditions safer. I think one of the misnomers in this community is, well, the seasons is sprinkled, so it's fine. Sprinklers are never meant to put out a fire. They're meant to reduce fire growth and allow for egress of people getting out. That is a huge community risk, even though it's a modern building, been inspected with all the compliance with the International Fire Code. The other thing that you have too, and that I'm learning a little bit more about, is we're a couple cycles behind the International Fire Code in state of Idaho. And so things that are happening now are going to be reflected in the next 3 years cycle. And we're, correct me if I'm wrong, Chief, we're 2 cycles behind.
Yep.
So you're right, it does. And having a robust prevention, I mean, if we were perfect fire chiefs, we would never have a fire.
Well,
because
I
we'd be
just bring it
good
up
at
because I'm not sure if you're aware, but Bonner County doesn't have any building code and it doesn't require International Fire Code. So when you say we're at more risk, in my mind, I'm thinking, wait, we make builders and developers go through lengthy, expensive augmentation of their building plans specifically to reduce fire risk and protect occupants and firefighters. And Bonner County has none of that. And it would seem to me that Bonner County areas, Sagal and West Side, would actually be greater risk for loss of life and firefighter, hazards because there is no International Fire Code in those areas.
So when I use the term community risk, I don't mean what's going to start a fire.
Okay.
I talk about buildings, community risk is going to look at earthquakes, it's going to look at floods, it's going to look at all kinds of stuff. I'm talking about infrastructure, I'm talking a loss of property, loss of life. You get a fire going, this community has learned, you get a fire going in a building and it can take out a whole block in Sandpoint. So when I start talking about community risk, first, understand it's anecdotal. I don't have any of that data, but none of us have any of that data. But I'm not talking about how a fire starts. Somebody that lives in Seasons could have a bunch of candles, they can knock their candle over and start a fire. There is no way that we are going to prevent that by application of the fire code.
Gotcha. Thank you for clarifying. I just wanted to understand when you said that, what you meant.
No problem. And again, jargon, right?
Yeah.
And that's where I think we really need to have a conversation about risk. And we could do a risk assessment as a city, as a county, come back and say, this is the safest community ever. I mean, anecdotally, we are, right? Because there's not many fires in Sandpoint as compared to other places. The next slide, please, is just a overview, and I'm not going to go through this for the sake of time, but this is from the Washington Fire Chiefs. Fire authorities are huge in Washington. They're obviously big in California. They're big in Utah. A lot of places are advocating that this is a better level of service. In fact, the Washington Fire Chiefs go so far to say, if you're trying to do this to save costs, don't do it. So, but I threw this up there just so we could have a conversation about what fire authorities are. Whether or not we're able to do that in the state of Idaho, we're still working through that. Next slide. So this is some of the things that may be solved by a fire authority if it's allowed as envisioned by some. Obviously, removing that financial, administrative, HR burden off the city and putting that into a separate legal entity. And I know that there's concern in this community and on this dais because I've heard people say it. I don't want to send money to another organization, but there is a reality that you are paying for a level of service. And I'm sure that there's other contracts that the city has that they pay to entities that are outside the city or that are subcontractors in other states. And so really the reality is that you're paying for a level of service. I do understand the concern, but I just wanted to bring that up from that perspective. And this is the last slide. And so this is just some bullet points, working with the district chairs, boards, I'm sorry, and their board chairs, kind of the direction they want to go. The problem we have is we have no plan. And it takes time to plan the plan, if that makes sense. We have to put together a plan. We have to ask some questions. We have to find out if this is even possible. And then I believe we need some professionals to come in and take a look at this and tell us what we don't know. And to take a look at the community risk, to take a look at the way we're doing things. And I know you're thinking in the back of your head, the Fitch study did that. A Fitch
Actually,
study left some
In the back of
zigs.
my head, I'm thinking the city of Sandpoint has a plan and we know how it works, which is the fire department, which worked for 80 years for us prior to this investigation and
Right.
Exploration of a JPA. So in my mind, I'm thinking, that's what I'm thinking. But
Right. But those folks that are interested in the fire authority, we've got to put together a plan. And I think there's been talk about it for the last decade and nobody's been the champion of that. Nobody has really done the homework. Nobody has engaged anyone, brought in the Fitch study, which was probably a great idea. So this just kind of outlines, kind of the next steps that the districts want to take. Again, I believe the districts, and I'm confident that I speak for the boards when they say they want the city of Sandpoint to be a part of this solution going forward. So with that, thank you for allowing me. This is very awkward to be a city of Sandpoint employee and just be standing up here and speaking on behalf of the districts.
you've done a great job.
If the district, I believe district board members are behind me, they feel free to correct me on anything when it comes their time to talk, and I'm happy to answer questions now or in the future.
Mr. Mayor, may I ask a question?
Go ahead, Councilman Dick.
So if I'm hearing you correctly, Deputy Armstrong, are you saying you are willing to be the champion for the department to go seek out what an authority or an enhanced JPA may look like?
Absolutely.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Mayor,
Go ahead, Councilman Espiro.
do you have any information? What's the holdback on figuring out if the state of Idaho were allowed to do an authority?
The fact that I only started asking questions about it 6 weeks ago, and the research that I've done and the research I've done with some colleagues, the Idaho code is very vague, which sometimes is great, but sometimes it's not, especially when you're trying to figure out, will this entity be eligible for the rights and protections under state law?
Appreciate that.
Anything else? Thank you
Thank
very
you,
much for your
Deputy Chief
time.
Armstrong. Great job. Any of the board members or chairman or chairwomen wish to speak or say anything? You're good, thanks. Okay. We will now provide an opportunity for the public comment. Public comment time is for comments only, no questions or debate. Those speaking to address only the council and myself, not members of the city staff or members of the audience. Please state your name and whether you reside within the city of Sandpoint.
Julie Perchinsky.
Hi, Julie.
Mayor, council people. I'd like to begin, I'm Julie Perchinsky and I live just down the street here in town. And I'd like to begin with just a little quote: coming together is a beginning, keeping together is progress, and working together is success, by Henry Ford. So I think we need to think about this situation in 3 questions. Why did this partnership begin? And I know I had quite an education this evening about how it did begin, but basically it was a partnership. It was a way to bring our county together and bring our fire departments together with the city and have a cohesive emergency system. So why are they not renewing the JPA as it stands right now? I would think we need to look at that. What doesn't work for them or the city, and why aren't they going to renew it? What's the problem with it? What issues have they had? And then third, this is 10 years in the works. This is something that has happened for 10 years. It's really not that long of a time to really understand what the long-range benefits and disadvantages are for this cohesive partnership. Coordination and partnership are so vital in all our emergency services. And if Lahaina taught us anything, it was that it can happen in a second. And I really don't know what happened with all the firemen there and how they all thought it went, but the city of Sandpoint needs these guys and women, and they need, the outlying areas need all of us, and I think we really need to consider a partnership with the county when it comes time to our emergency services. Fires don't know boundaries. So, thank you.
Absolutely.
Luke Ament.
Good evening, Mr. Ament.
Good evening, Mayor, City Council, Luke Ament, city resident and Bonner County Commissioner. Some of my comments tonight will be in reference to the county, but I am not here speaking officially for the county. My morning started, well, my second meeting of the morning was with the Idaho Association of Counties Legislative Committee. And one of the bills that we discussed was, and yes, this does apply to the JPA, just to be clear, I recognize what we're here tonight to talk about, was Senate Bill S-1416, which is about emergency medical services. Across the entire state, we are woefully unprepared for the growth that we have. This bill has been shelved. County commissioners across all of our 44 counties discussed there is a dearth of volunteers. So what we are experiencing here in our ambulance services, in our fire services, it is across our entire state. One of my next meetings was with the Sandpoint Area Transportation Plan. We are growing. The Idaho Transportation Department has these meetings where we determine which funds are going to go in which places. And let me tell you, we have expanded, as you well know, because you're working on that. Bonner County grew 25.7% from 2010 to 2022 versus the United States, which had 7.7% growth. Bonner County has 13 fire districts, and everybody is proud of them. Sandpoint had a municipal fire department, of which my father-in-law retired from. I am here in support of an enhancement of the JPA because we are all in this together. And I'd like to give you an example as a county commissioner. Bonner County collects $145 million. We do not receive administrative fees on all of those transactions. There is a consequence of being in a Dillon's rule state, which is that we have to follow the rules that the state legislature sets. That money flows to our coffers and then is distributed to these other areas. We are stronger together, and that is why I am in support of the enhancement of the JPA. I think that you can work together, and Bonner County is here to assist you. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Ament.
Clint Frank.
Evening, Mayor, Council,
Oh, Mr. Frank.
how are you all doing? So it seems like tonight we've talked not much about service and safety. And that's probably what you're gonna hear a lot from my comrades behind me that are gonna speak. But as a cornerstone of what we do as a fire department. So you've heard me speak many times that working together in a coordinated and cooperative agreement is better for the communities we serve. It's much safer for our responders and residents because it's best practice in an industry. To dissolve this partnership between the agencies is literally one of the worst decisions you can make for the residents of Sandpoint. Your level of services for residents as well as business owners would be greatly reduced. Having supporting 911 response plans, standard operating guidelines, annual training standards, and shared equipment, all for the same department, keeps us much safer when we're on the job, and more importantly, leads to better outcomes when residents call in their time of need. It sends the right resources every time with people who work and train together daily. It allows a 4-station response to large-scale calls and move-ups for coverage when other stations are on assignments. To stray away from this and go to a single Sandpoint station response literally makes no sense. I know we've talked about automatic aid, mutual aid to fill those gaps. As Chief Armstrong said, those aren't always guaranteed. Right now, we have automatic aid already built into our response plans. I've heard concern that it's not Sandpoint's responsibility to help outlying districts, but helping our neighbors is something that all of us in this room were fundamentally raised with. The same help returns to Sandpoint when we're in need. We have an opportunity to build a great fire department together. The communities of Ketchum and Wood River Valley along with McCall and Donnelly, are watching our next steps as we either strengthen this agreement to a possible fire authority or step away. These communities like ours have limited and underfunded resources and realize the benefit of leveraging their abilities by working together. Let's set the right example to the state by continuing to work for our communities. It's an important vote tonight, and I wish I had 6 yes votes, but I don't think I will. Unfortunately, the cornerstone of what we do and the service we provide for our community has mainly fallen on deaf ears. It appears many of you are prepared to vote down the continuance of the GPA without any public engagement or discussion really with your partner agencies or us as firefighters. I'm just wondering how you know what is best for the community during an emergency when you actually have never done this job. In closing, the community has a better equipped fire department since Selkirk Fire formed as a GPA in 2014. Every one of your firefighters believes in continuing working together. Let's support the men and women who risk their lives. Thank you.
Thanks, Clint.
Nicholas Crum.
Good evening.
Mr. Crum.
Hello, Mayor and Council. My name is Nick Crum. I'm a City of Sandpoint resident, Selkirk Fire Captain, husband, and father. I'm standing here urging you to seek partnership with your surrounding fire districts to keep Selkirk firefighters working with each other in a group model. Not doing so and reverting backwards into a single entity creates a dangerous and unsafe environment for your firefighters, your residents, and the visitors to this beautiful city. Did you know that Sandpoint by itself doesn't have an air compressor capable of filling their air breathing bottles on fires? Within a fire authority type model, you get 2 immediately available. Did you know on average there are only 2 to 3 firefighters on duty to Sandpoint to cover a city population of 10,000? And that's not including our summertime population either. When NFPA states that you need at least 2 firefighters outside the structure for 2 firefighters to go inside the structure, please tell me how that's going to get accomplished with only 2 firefighters on duty. How are we to come rescue you or your loved ones when we can't even meet the most basic safety standard? On callbacks for larger incidents with the JPA, you had the ability of 24 talented, hardworking men and women ready to fight. Without that system, you revert back to a group of 9. Relying on automatic and mutual aid from neighboring districts is a poor policy and unreliable. Districts have their own calls and stakeholders to look after. It's not a guarantee you'll get help from these other fire districts if they're already tending to other calls or you have different leadership at different times. With a group partnership, you get a piggyback effect where multiple calls and stations are covered in the 90th percentile. All involved entities reap shared benefits. Under partnership with multiple agencies, our apparatus are interchangeable. When one of our engines breaks down in Sandpoint, we can bring in a working replacement from a partner agency to prevent downtime and an unsafe condition of responding on a wrong type of apparatus. For every $1 that a City of Sandpoint taxpayer is putting in for fire service, they're getting 3 back to the JPA. That's a good return on investment for all stakeholders. They are receiving the culminated benefits of a larger staff for response, more apparatus as resources, and safer gear for us to use. If Sandpoint Fire reverts back to a single entity, it puts Sandpoint firefighters and its citizens in danger. The comment that post-decoupling will reflect a stable model and the level of service is anticipated to remain the same is a lie. It will get worse if not improved. I urge you to seek collaborative partnership for your Selkirk firefighters to stay as one group to keep us safe and to give the citizens of Sandpoint the best value in a highly conservative region. Prove me wrong saying that the City of Sandpoint doesn't care about firefighters.
Nick, I just had a question for you. The 1 to 3, where did you get that dollar? The dollar invested equals 3 returned?
You're receiving the culminated benefits of 3 separate entities working together. And so every $1 that's put in by a Sandpoint taxpayer, you reap the culminated benefits of all the other districts combined.
Okay.
Ashley Crum.
My name is Ashley Crum and I am a Sandpoint resident, and I'm going to apologize if I do get emotional because this doesn't only affect my way of life, but everyone's way of life in this room. Mr. Mayor and elected officials, to say I'm disappointed in you all is an understatement. Not only am I disappointed, I am ashamed by your actions in deciding to pull out of the city from the JPA. Not only are you putting the fire crew's life in danger, but you're putting our way of lives as citizens in danger. Please tell me how going from a crew of 24 down to 9 is safer. How is not having the right equipment, like my husband explained earlier, to fill air bottles safer? I am not just a citizen of this city, but I am the wife to a fire captain as well. He chose to be a firefighter and to sacrifice himself for the greater good of this community, and I'm proud of him for that. These amazing men and women and their families are willing to give their all and their way of life for you. As you know, staffing is already an issue, and pulling out of the JPA will be making staffing worse. This will also up the chance of when, not if, someone gets injured or worse, killed. And it won't be for lack of training, knowledge, or leadership from the crew. It will be from you all and your egos. So when this happens, because you're pulling out of the JPA, I hope you know that the blood is on your hands. And God forbid it's my husband or my neighbor or one of your families. And if it is, I want you all to look me in the eye and tell my daughter her father's not coming home. So with all due respect, you're making one of the worst decisions I've ever seen any city council do. Please stay in the JPA. Thank you.
Ashley, you do understand, thanks for your comments. You do understand that the correspondence that I read at the beginning and the email correspondence from Westside and Sagal stated yes to my question. You will not be continuing the current JPA model.
I am well aware. I've actually grown up in this world of first responders with cop and firefighters and watched Gig Harbor, Washington not be part of a fire authority. It was one of the worst decisions they also made.
I just wanted you to make sure that you understood that.
I do
received
understand that.
correspondence from those districts saying they are not going to continue.
However, Deputy Chief Armstrong stood up here and told you they do want to move forward with the city of Sandpoint. Thank you.
Thank you, Ashley.
Tom Eddy.
Good evening, Mr. Eddy.
Good evening, Mr. Mayor, Council. My name is Tom Eddy, and I am a resident of the city of Sandpoint and a former council member. Kind of nice being on this side of the counter. I feel that discontinuing Sandpoint's participation in the Selkirk Fire JPA would be a disservice to our community. I had the honor of serving as a city representative during the early years of the JPA, and I still believe that a regional fire response is necessary for serving our growing community. The intention of the original JPA was to create a model for the future and a test for improved response and training. Lowered costs through economy of scales, and it was not meant to stand in perpetuity without constant modifications. Selkirk Fire is our regional risk management service and has been a benefit to the communities it serves. I want to know that our firefighters' morale is high, that turnover remains low, and the highest trained, most professional people continue to view our area as home and the area in which they desire to fulfill their career dreams. I also want to know that there is a coordinated response to large incidents provided by career professionals that are knowledgeable about shared equipment and resources, communicate regularly, share the same goals, and train together daily. Removing Sandpoint from the structure would eliminate many benefits for our residents, both tangible and intangible. I hope that the city continues its participation as a member of Selkirk Fire and partners in the development of an even stronger model for fire protection and EMS services in our community. Thank you.
Thank you, Tom.
Tennille Toussaint.
Good evening, Tennille.
Good evening. My name is Tennille Toussaint. I am an engineer with Selkirk Fire and also a city resident. And I'm not here to tell you guys anything that you probably haven't heard today. I'm obviously in support of staying in the JPA. As you mentioned earlier, you guys, the city as a whole, you have a whole lot of stuff on your to-do list. We are a small piece of your pie. And I think, wouldn't that be a benefit of the city moving forward with an enhanced fire authority to let the experts in fire run the fire department, take the HR off your plate, take the finance burden off your plate. You know, that's all we do. It's all we focus on. That's all we know. So wouldn't it be a benefit to have the fire chief and this administrative assistants run and enhance the fire department? And as mentioned earlier, you know, I think with 9 employees or 27 employees, we are a unique entity that we do work 56-hour work weeks. We're here 24/7. We're still gonna have problems. You're gonna have negotiations, you're gonna have grievances. The things that, like I said, your problems won't go away. It'll just change slightly. We talked about 9 is not sufficient staffing. As a city resident, I know that there's 2 people on that fire truck. And as you drive around, you know, our city is growing. I look at all the 3-story apartment buildings and complexes going in, knowing if and when something's gonna happen, that I'm not gonna be able to go in and get somebody. I've been full-time 6 years on this department. I was a volunteer for 4 before that. And of those 6 years, for 3 years, I worked at a department by myself out in West Side. And I can tell you that it's a big deal that if I go to somewhere by myself in the middle of the night, I know that somebody's behind me instantly. I have a chief coming. I know that all my coworkers are behind my back, and that you cannot replace. So as I said, our city or area is growing. I think staying in this model of moving forward with an enhanced JPA is in the best interest of our city. It's in the best interest of our residents and the safety of our firefighters. Thank you.
Thanks, Tim.
Merlin Glass.
Good evening, Mr. Glass.
Hi. Hello, Mayor. Hi, Council. Merlin Glass, City of Dover, Dover City Council, and also within West Side Fire District. I'm going to be a little redundant because I've said many of the same things standing right here in front of you, and you've heard them before. But I want to take exception to your very first slide, Mayor, where you illustrated Sagal and Sandpoint as apples and oranges, and I think you're totally wrong. Everybody suffers from the same consequence. It's just a matter of scale, okay? Sandpoint probably has more opportunity for calamity than other areas, but most instances are all man-made. So the JPA's primarily administrative documents, not operational. You mentioned NFPA standards, and it's a big book. It talks about all kinds of things, sprinklers, doors, all that stuff. But it also talks about minimum staffing and what it comprises an engine. And that's at 4 people. So if you were to fulfill NFPA standards with 8 people on duty a day, you'd have 2 engines. And that may be okay for a small fire, but something like the Pineda Theater, if that was going to go, where are you going to get your help? So one thing as elected officials you need to consider is increasing the staff and having a fire department that can sustain that redundancy and not depend upon mutual aid. Because mutual aid ought to be a rare experience. It shouldn't happen, okay? But what could happen is that you have an incident here in town and somebody makes a judgment call in another district because we don't have a JPA and say that, hey, I can't go because I don't want to leave my community unprotected. That could happen in Carywood, Sagal, West Side, and then that's what you're left with. So there was a lot of stuff in there where you're talking dollars and cents. You'll never find the fire service being a moneymaker. 60% of any city budget is probably emergency services anyway. So when you want to go grab dollars, what happens? You go after the cops, you go after the firemen, and you try and work out a deal. The JPA is just an administrative structure that makes these guys work more efficient and benefits the city that way. But you're woefully behind the times in terms of fire protection. And the fact that the lady mentioned about working alone, I think that's abysmal. And I came from a department where we had constant manning at 4 people on an engine. And I can tell you the mayor and the city council hated it. They hated it because of the dollars. And, you know, we need to get past that because we're talking about protecting our community. And you got plenty of examples you can take. You know, do an after action report on Medicine Lake, for example, or the Gray Fire. Okay, those are close. Last night they had a,
Mr. Glass.
last night they had a town hall in Elk about their fire. That would be interesting to listen to. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Glass.
Glenn Cassidy.
Mr. Cassidy.
Hello. I'm Glenn Cassidy. I'm a captain with the Selkirk Fire Department. I've been an employee of the city for 22 years. I want to address a few points that have stood out to me in the course of the past few months, specifically in the past week. In reference to the mayor's recent letter, he stated that Sandpoint fire response times and service will not be reduced due to mutual and auto aid agreements. I don't feel this is wise to rely on, as these agreements are not guarantees. These are negotiated agreements and would need to be truly be mutual by all agencies involved. Are they possible? Yes, but until they are signed, they do not exist. The city does not currently have volunteers, unlike how it was prior to the JPA, about 15 volunteers just for the city. So stepping back as a standalone agency will be worse now than it was prior to the JPA. Keep in mind also that the city will have a loss of 5 of its experienced firefighters by the end of this April, almost 100 years of experience from the original pre-GPA fire, Sandpoint fire. If we go back, we will have 4 of the original firefighters with 5 new hires since the JPA was formed. I have been approached by community members who stated they have heard that the city will make Sandpoint into a premier fire department. What does this mean? That sounds fantastic, but if this were true, it's going to be a monumental heavy lift to achieve. The city would go back to 9 total firefighters, 2 to 3 firefighters on duty a day, protecting the entire city. To emulate a premier department, would the city strive for an ISO rating of 1? More staffing, 3 to 4 on the ladder truck, 2 companies running out of the Sandpoint station, another station on the north end of town, an ARF service at the airport, $6 to $8 million in equipment, station and apparatus upgrades. FYI, the newest apparatus we have is a ladder truck and almost 10 years old. The city does not have a breathing air compressor. What is the plan here? I have reached out to all the council and have had only one of them reach back to me. My intent was to sit down with each of you, make sure you understand what the implications are of this decision you are about to make and how it will impact the service to its citizens, let alone firefighter safety concerns. The fact that only 6 council members, that out of 6 council members, only 1 cared enough to reach back to me makes me feel that either you don't want to know more or you already have reached a conclusion. This is not about me or any individual firefighter. This is about all 24 firefighters trying to inform the elected what it is we need to be successful in providing the highest level of service to our communities and make sure that we go home to our families at the end of our shifts. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Ann Calhoun.
Hi, I'm Ann Calhoun. I live in Sagal. I'm actually a spouse of one of the firefighters for Selkirk Fire. I had a whole thing I was going to read to you, and then I was like, forget it. I'm just going to fly out the seat of my pants here. I feel like I've been in a lot of these meetings, and I've listened repeatedly to what they have said. And sometimes I'm hearing the same questions from you guys over and over, like you're not listening, you're not paying attention. And it's concerning to me. I can tell you about the 2 in, 2 out as a spouse. It's worrisome. These are all our families. We're a family as firefighters, spouses, children. And I find it odd that you want to go back 80 years to go, you said you want to go back, oh, when Sandpoint was this premier city of Sandpoint, 80 years ago, we were great. We are in 2024. We are growing. I drive back and forth to the city of Hayden every single day for work, and it is traffic coming back and forth. And you are not understanding that 9 firefighters will not be able to support this city. And I am sad for your citizens. I am thankful for this fire department. When you mentioned that Bonner County doesn't have any building codes, the city of Sandpoint does. And my husband has done inspections. He's a Sagal employee. He has been in the city of Sandpoint, this fire department, Station 1, for 6 years. Here for the city of Sandpoint. He has written inspections year after year, right in the same life-threatening scenarios in the city buildings, and nothing has been done about it. But they write them over and over for you every single time. I would just, speaking as just a concerned wife, but also as an employee, we've all been employees, we all have jobs. You guys are all tired. You guys all have businesses. I go to them. You have personal lives. My thing is, I don't feel like you're listening to your own city employees. The 9 firefighters are asking you to please stay within the JPA. Listen to your staff. I have had businesses. I have run businesses. And when all your employees start to speak, and they're speaking, and they're repetitively telling you the same thing over and over, it's your responsibility to listen. If the department heads aren't listening, if the manager isn't listening, you're running a restaurant. If your managers are not listening to your employees, they're going to the owner. They're all going to speak up. Please, you guys, just listen to your employees. Thank you.
Bernie Frischette.
Mayor, Council,
Good
Bernie
evening.
Frischette, walked through the doors August 1st, 2002, became a Sandpoint volunteer. August 7th, hired by Chief Tyler. Got hired at Sagal Fire 2004, been standing in front of you with 22 years worth of experience. And I can't emphasize enough the message of keeping this fire department together because of its strength. And I want to paint a picture for you in a slightly different way. A 200-foot hose weighs 520 pounds. Think about that for a minute, 520 pounds. We have a fire in First Ave to address what you're talking about for liabilities out in the district. Well, guess what? Downtown Sandpoint's the fire that scares me the most because I want all of you to go into those basements. A basement with Catherine Cassidy almost fell through on our First Ave and Bridge Street fire because the fire was beneath us. Massive liability on First Ave, just First Ave alone. It's the fire that scares me the most. You're asking your 9 firefighters before his Sandpoint fire, who had a minimum of 2 staffing, not 3, and now during Selkirk to have a minimum of staffing of 2, not 3. So it's the same regardless of the name. You're asking 2 firefighters to show up across the street from Canada, look at it slightly down the block, mid-block, and go, yep, we got it. No, they don't. Because when you get a 2nd floor fire and a 3rd floor fire, and you got 2 guys or gals trying to drag 520 pounds of hose, and I weigh 185 pounds, guess what? In my turnouts and my SCBA, I just added another 75 pounds. And I got an 8-pound axe in my hand. Trying to paint a picture of what you're asking us to do. Don't forget, I'm wearing a mask and I have restricted air. So I'm done after 15 minutes of dragging this 520 pounds. And now I turn around and say, where's my replacement? Oh, they're not here because there's two Sandpoint firefighters. We're going to lose the block. And let's not forget what's behind that block, 2nd Ave. You are asking us to be gods with 2 people if you separate out of the JPA. I cannot stress enough how much this group of people needs numbers to throw people at these fires. I need you to fight to keep me. I purposely wore my Sagal hat. No, this is Selkirk. I purposely was. You don't want me to be Sagal. You want to fight to keep me in the JPA so you can throw numbers at these fires. We almost lost Glenn Cassidy in the basement of the first Ave fire. We almost lost Solon Wolf, who had fire behind him in that fire, but you've never heard these stories. You need to fight to keep Selkirk fire, to throw people at these fires.
Thank you, Bernie.
Michael Gowan.
Good evening, Mr. Gao.
Good evening, Mr. Mayor. I have a lot of things to say and a little time to do it. Councilman Welker, you asked me to do it, you're wrong. You said that each jurisdiction does not have the ability to determine their own level of service, and they do. You currently have that. You would have it even more so with an enhanced JPA. I think what you're talking about is salary and benefits, and that's contractual. So there's completely different things there. So you asked me to do it, I did. Mr. Mayor, to make a clarification, you keep discussing that or keep making the point that the districts are the ones who per your letter saying that they're moving out of the JPA. And what it actually says is that they're prepared to move to a more enhanced model. It doesn't necessarily say that they're wanting to exit the JPA. So I just wanted to make those 2 points. I don't think I introduced myself, although I think you all know me. Michael Gow, I reside in Bonner County. I'm saddened that we're back here discussing the same issue of withdrawing from the JPA without adequate work and proper investigation to determine an appropriate outcome. As you are aware, I feel strongly in keeping this endeavor together for the benefit of firefighter and public safety. As I had mentioned last time we spoke, the citizens benefit from this collaboration with multiple personnel and resources coming to the rescue. NFPA, which is National Fire Protection Association, people have talked about it. They are recommendations, but NFPA standards recommend 4 firefighters on an initial fire, and more than 10 to 12 should be there to perform all the different roles that are involved. Where do these firefighters come from? For the population density the mayor discussed in his presentation, this is even more important. 2019, a large business caught fire downtown. Pretty much every fire department within the county and some outside this county were called for assistance, and 7 businesses were still lost. If the districts continue as one entity in a JPA, you will more than likely only receive 1 apparatus from that entity. So automatic or mutual aid is not sufficient. I do understand the struggles and frustrations city staff have with managing this program. However, past city staff asked for this control, and it doesn't have to remain that way for this to continue. I believe there are alternate solutions to keep this together, and if all parties truly want it to work and work collectively to make it happen, ask that you remain in the JPA and approve a 1-year extension, or at least continue until the end of the fiscal year in order to conduct research to see if other alternate solutions are viable. During that time frame, you need to have thorough discussions with district representatives to determine an appropriate outcome. Please vote to continue operations in the Joint Powers Agreement, moving towards something better. Thank you for your time and listening.
Thank you, Mr. Gao.
Thomas Weeks.
Evening, Mr. Weeks.
Good evening, Mr. Mayor, senior council members. My name is Thomas Weeks, currently live in Rathdrum, but I'm a Selkirk firefighter. I've only been a firefighter for a relatively short amount of time, having spent 2 years as a volunteer and 2 years as a full-time firefighter. I do, however, have experience in service. Prior to being a firefighter, I was a non-commissioned officer in the United States Army, where I had the honor to serve as a paratrooper in the U.S. Army's Global Reaction Force. a unit that was on standby to deploy anywhere in the world in 18 hours. It was one of many opportunities I had to serve with some of the finest men and women this country has to offer. I was able to witness and take part in a great deal involving leadership, training, organizational structures, and mission accomplishment. I also joined a long and distinguished line of U.S. service members who never lost a battle, yet somehow, seemingly, lost a war. How could this happen, may I ask you? Politics and special interests. People at the top not listening to people in the trenches on the reality of what's required to accomplish the mission. People allowing priorities to shift and losing sight of what truly matters. You've heard from multiple people with more experience than I that the Selkirk Fire Joint Powers Model provides the best and most effective service and therefore most safety to our community. I ask that you do not make the same mistakes as so many who have gone before you. I support strong emergency services. I support safety in our community. I support Selkirk Fire. I would ask that you do the same. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Weeks, for your service and for your comments.
Patrick Broyles.
And that's online. Can you hear us, Mr. Broyles?
I am here.
All right. Thanks for your comments. Go for it.
A resident of Spokane County, former volunteer, Bonner County, Sandpoint Fire, Northside Fire, Westside Fire. I think you guys should continue the JPA, the sacrifice the guys have done in the 10 years of the JPA. It would be horrendous if you guys discontinue it. Go back to the model of 2 firefighters on duty. You guys should really think about your actions before you make a decision. You guys honestly should have a conversation with everybody who is involved in this. Have people involved. Honestly, you guys should also, sorry, give me a minute, please. Also, you guys should not make a decision tonight on your actions. Being a former volunteer up there, you never know if you're on a call, if you're going to get backup or mutual aid. You don't know. It's a sacrifice these guys make every day. And closing, I honestly think you guys should continue this enhanced GPA, at least for the fiscal year.
Thank you very much for your comments.
Mr. Mayor, no one else has indicated a desire to speak that I'm aware of.
Right. With those who wish to speak, having had the opportunity to do so, is there any further council discussion or questions for staff? I know I have one, a pretty simple one. I'll just jump in quickly. Chief, I heard a lot of commentary about 2 firefighters on duty in Sandpoint. Our standard would be 3 if there was a reversion back to the 2014 model. Is that right?
Whether you revert back or whether you stay in the current model, that is determined, that is our minimum staffing. We have 3 billets a day, 3 firefighters a day, but our minimum staffing is down to 2. And that is also bargained through the CBA.
Okay, thanks. Council members, I again open it up to you to start what will be a discussion. Questions for staff? Discussion amongst yourselves.
Is this deliberations?
What's that?
Is this deliberations?
This is discussion. I figured we have some discussion and then potentially see if there's a motion out there. You're welcome to make a motion, see if it passes.
Might I ask if we have a quick 5-minute recess?
Absolutely. 5-minute recess.
Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. Reconvening at 7:19 PM. Continuing, are there any further council discussions or questions for staff?
Mr. Mayor, I do.
Councilwoman Duquette?
And I'm going to try to do this the right way. I know to talk amongst us because I do have questions that concern all of us. I also would like to ask Chief Gilchrist some question or a question, as you haven't participated at all and you are the chief of these firefighters. I guess the one question I would like to know is, how do you feel about their safety if they are left as just a Sandpoint fire? You feel they're going to be safe?
I think, so I've kind of go back to a phrase that I've always used. I think that most fire chiefs can agree that they always like a bigger budget and a bigger staff. So operating off of that, I think that we need more people all over all over the system. To have two people going or one person riding a truck is ridiculous. I've never liked, one single source, single resources. There is always room for improvement to increase staffing. There's a dollar amount that comes with it. But I think what you do is you take a look at where you are right now and the problem that we have internally, not just in Sandpoint, but also in Sagal and Westside, is there is not, we heard a couple people talk, there hasn't been a risk assessment done of our community. So I actually started working on a risk assessment, and I hope to have it done here in the next couple of months. It does take time, but that helps you get the data on how you base your decision-making processes on what staffing you're going to need, where you're going to have resource allocation, where you're going to stick fire engines, where you're going to house people. A lot of times people stand up and they want to, we need 25 more firefighters. Well, how do you get to know that you need 25 more firefighters, just to be riding that on emotion? You need data to back it up too. But I like how the deputy chief put it. It needs to not just be a data set that you do an analysis on, it also needs to be intuitive as well. So there needs to be the human side. You need to make sure that you're checking all the boxes. There's a process to the risk assessment, and I'm hoping that by the time I get done with the risk assessment, that we'll have the answer on how many we're going to need for our future and how we're going to go about getting it.
And so with the risk assessment, is that something we should be waiting for before we make any big decisions?
I would appreciate it if you would. I think that it's going to kind of paint the picture of where we are and how we're growing. It's going to identify where our strengths are, but it's also going to identify gaps that we have. And we have gaps. I mean, there's no doubt about it. When you're working down to two-person units, that's a gap.
Anybody else want to comment about that, or do you want to see something else, or can I ask some more questions? Joel, go.
You have the mic, go ahead.
Go. Well, I know we're supposed to take turns, right?
Go ahead.
Yeah, usually I like to take turns, but,
Happy to.
all right.
Mr. Mayor,
Councilman Spiro.
question for legal counsel. I asked, I believe Chief Armstrong, forgive me if I'm wrong. They're investigating whether a fire authority is legal in the state of Idaho. And as I understood it, the information was coming from the state of Washington. What does our legal staff believe about a fire authority in the state of Idaho?
So there's no legal mechanism for a fire authority as it's been discussed in the state of Idaho. That's created by statute. The Washington legislature has created that, and that's why it can happen in Washington. And it would take legislative action to have a fire authority in the state of Idaho. The closest thing that the state of Idaho has to a fire authority is the creation of a separate taxing district.
Okay, if I understood correctly, was state code is not it's more vague. So in your opinion, it's not vague?
I don't think that the answer to that question is there's much ambiguity. It doesn't exist.
Okay.
So there's no vagueness. There's no ability to create a fire authority.
But a separate taxing district is the closest thing
To the fire authority as it is in the state of Washington.
So Zach, are we to therefore understand that there is no precedent for fire authorities in the state of Idaho?
Correct. As it's being discussed here, That all the precedent that's being discussed here is from the state of Washington or other states.
So the proposal before us tonight, I feel, is not to continue JPA as it's existed for the last 10 years. In fact, I've heard endless stories, including about a 15,000 word article in the Reader right before the election about how morale is extremely low among Selkirk firefighters because of the failures of the JPA. We know from the Fitch report that there are many shortcomings from the JPA. The proposal I hear tonight, though, is to form something that is not, there's no precedent for in the state. We would be the first fire authority. This is going to require lobbying in Boise, probably over several years, and the formation of new legislation in order to create something that's been proposed to us tonight. The taxing district, of course, 2 of the 3 parties are taxing districts. And I think I'm 100% for moving towards a fire district to serve the people of Bonner County. But that is also a major undertaking. And we know that, you know, just getting levies passed to hire a 4th or 5th firefighter in Sagal or West Side is going to be a challenge this November. Establishing a new taxing district is a whole other challenge that I don't see happening in the next year to 5 to 10. So this suggestion that continuing in a joint powers agreement that everybody here seems to agree is struggling, and we've heard from many firefighters about how low morale is and how they want higher staffing. Those are things we need to address as independent taxing districts, as West Side needs to figure out how to get a levy so they can hire more firefighters. Sagal needs to do the same. Sandpoint, I believe that the chief has a vision for increasing our level of service through more staffing in Sandpoint that we can do. But just the suggestion that I feel like we're being sold this narrative or this vision that is just not possible in the state of Idaho, because there's no precedent for it and there's no legislation, there's no state legislation that allows for it. So why continue something that we have heard repeatedly for years now is struggling, and morale is already so low based on feedback we've gotten from firefighters, when the solution is more firefighters at each station. We all agree on that. We have just a couple numbers that have popped out to me from Deputy Chief Armstrong's own presentation, from the numbers we've studied as council members. 282 to 30. That's the ratio of shifts where Sandpoint is staffed at its minimum level because we send firefighters to rural fire stations, to shifts where Sandpoint is receiving firefighters so that we are able to achieve minimum staffing. So when I talk about level of service, and also, by the way, JPA is an auto aid agreement. That is the basis on which we enjoy a high level of service in Sandpoint, the auto aid agreement. All these things about apparatus, we can solve that through some acquisitions of key capital equipment for our fire service, for example, refilling oxygen tanks. But the basis on which we enjoy rapid response to fires in Sandpoint and the rest of the rural districts enjoy rapid responses is the auto aid agreement. Nobody up here has suggested discontinuing the auto aid agreement. We are considering discontinuing Sandpoint's participation in JPA because it is not working for Sandpoint. For Sandpoint taxpayers, 25% of our Sandpoint taxpayers' money, that's 25% of our tax revenues, go to Selkirk Fire, to fire service for City of Sandpoint residents. Even if an authority were legally authorized in the state of Idaho, it would be, quite frankly, reckless and insane for the 6 of us to just agree to give 25% of our tax revenues to an independent authority to handle all service for areas outside of Sandpoint as well. So that's an aside, though, because that can't happen. It's not allowed in the state of Idaho. So these are just some other numbers. 4.7 to 500. That's the area of Sandpoint in square miles relative to the area of West Side, Sagal, and Sandpoint combined. The area of these rural districts in Sandpoint is over 100 times greater than Sandpoint. We are a densely populated urban area. Our needs are unique. I believe that we can meet those needs as a Sandpoint Fire Department better and have higher morale and have better retention and be a very attractive place for firefighters to work if we were to be a Sandpoint Fire Department. 30%. there was a number 20% on the screen. It's actually closer to 30%. That's the percentage of our HR and finance department's time that is allocated towards responding to, or shouldn't say responding to, but to serving the needs of the JPA and the 24 to 27 firefighters that are city employees serving an area of 500 square miles. So those are just some numbers. I heard the claim that we're making decisions based on ego. This is the egotistical thing to do would just be to do what everybody in this room wants and get a pat on the back. Our responsibility, I heard accusations that there's special interests behind political decisions. The special interests of the 6 of us are those of the Sandpoint taxpayers, 25% of whose tax revenues go towards fire service. So those are just some thoughts, some numbers I wrote down during that presentation. But I thank you for clarifying, Zach, on the legal possibilities of a fire authority. And again, fire district, I think all of us are for that. But that's a whole other challenge that's way beyond our wheelhouse.
Thank you, Councilman Welker.
On that same point, can I talk to you more
Councilwoman
about that? Sorry, Mr.
Duquette,
Mayor.
go for it.
It's just that I looked up the statute that Mr. Frank had shared, or somebody shared, a consultant, 67232288. I read through a lot of that, and it says that the state, and I think what the vagueness was the state allows you to, there's language to provide you with everything you need to build an entity the way you would like it. You cannot call it a fire authority. It is not a fire authority. But as vague as it is, I read through that, and I think it was Clint that had the information written out, and I, of course, can't put my finger on it right now, about you can use that to create an entity. And that entity can be what you want it to be. You can't call it a fire. The state law.
Would we call it a?
You know what? I
The
didn't expect.
statute that you cited is the statute for the creation of JPA.
Okay.
And so the statute that you're discussing, of course, we can create a JPA, and we can create what has been sort of loosely determined as an enhanced JPA. And that is the legal vehicle to do that, to create that mechanism.
And it's not called a fire authority.
Correct.
But
And
can't
so the fire authority, as it's being used,
Right.
that's referring to a Washington statute
Right.
that doesn't exist. The statute that you cited, and certainly we can modify the JPA and in various different ways, and I'm happy to discuss how it can be modified if you would like, but it's not a fire authority.
Right. But there is an avenue to take if the fire community wanted to create an entity to control, like they're talking about, where everybody participates, puts in your fees, and they have their own governing board. That is allowed in Idaho.
That's correct.
Okay.
And Councilwoman Duquette, staff visited with the Idaho Tax Commission. And what they made quite clear to us is that a fire district is very legal. And I would echo Councilman Welker's comments that I would put tons of effort, energy, and time in to look at the creation of a fire district that would cover any area, just like EMS does for Bonner County. The reality of the situation today is that we have a 60-day notice. We have an expiring JPA agreement, and we are required to take action under our obligations in the agreement to give 60-day notice of our intent to withdraw, terminate, however you want to describe it. And we don't have a mechanism to move on, or if we want to explore a fire district, I think that's going to take a year or 2 years and a significant lobbying effort and educational effort to our residents of why that would be beneficial.
But that's a taxing district. That's a vote.
Sagal and West Side are taxing districts today.
Right. But when all of us are together, we were a joint powers of agreement. They were still their taxing districts, but everybody was together. Seems to me Armstrong has responded. He would be a champion to look through this, see what it can be. And I really don't want to be included in somebody who's only looking at tax dollars. Because I feel my duty is to, it's just a comment that
No, yeah.
that Ms. Counselor Welker had made. I think my duty to the residents is protect health, safety, and welfare. And I think that's what we're doing right now with this joint regionalized group working together for the safety of everybody.
I would just point out that 50% of the residents in the combined area are not your constituents.
But they're my friends and my relatives, just like everybody else is. We are a community. And
I don't disagree.
okay, I do not want to be an isolated group.
Well, I think when the budget process starts next month, you may have a different perspective when you look at a fixed amount of dollars and a
understand.
fixed amount of demand.
Well, that's why, but don't you think this would take that burden away from the city?
Oh, I would love,
It would take the
let me be
burden
very
away
clear.
from
I would
you.
love to take the burden away from the city. Because as was
That's
stated
the
by a
idea.
firefighter, they have the capability. This is their single focus. It's sort of one of 12 things we do at this city. I think it's a great idea. And I would 100% support the formation of a district to take over those responsibilities. I think what I'd have a big problem with is when we have professional HR, professional finance, professional budget, and we are going to then, and we have 80 years of historic, relatively professional, safe, effective fire services, why we would give 25% of our taxes, of our general fund taxes, to someone else to start up a new entity.
To take the burden off of Sandpoint, to take the burden off of you, to make it its own creation. Like Armstrong said about contracting out for fire services.
Mr. Mayor.
Yes.
Go ahead, Councilman Wilbur.
Just to respond to that, the burden that we are experiencing right now is because of the 27 firefighters for whom we're administering payroll, we're administering HR services, we're administering, the burden is because we're serving the greater district's fire personnel through Sandpoint. And yes, this was a decision made 3 years ago with the last round of renegotiation of the JPA. Should we go back to a 9 or 12 person Sandpoint Fire Department, that burden shrinks dramatically. We're not, what the mayor's pointing out is that by sending $1.2 to $1.5 million a year of taxpayer money to a third party and authority, even if we should agree for an enhanced JPA, it's not really, the benefit for us is minuscule because we probably would see less than 10 or less than 8% of our HR and finance staff time go towards administering the Sandpoint Fire Department. Most of the burden is because of our participation in JPA. So the benefit, we're now paying an additional HR, finance, payroll team to administer what we are perfectly capable of administering ourselves.
But it sounds like that's the burden to the city right now, is doing that. And if there's another entity that can take that over and we contract fire services through them and keep everybody together, I think team, again, together, everyone accomplishes more. These guys and girls, women and men are a team, and they want to continue as a team. And I'm just trying to see why it would be such an issue to allow them to proceed with that, especially listening to Deputy Chief Armstrong. It's like, he's got it. He's a go-getter, it appears. I don't know, somebody else share.
Mr. Mayor, if you don't.
Councilman Dick?
Pam, I feel your sentiments as well too. And I do understand the legal side of going through with an authority. And I think one thing that became quite apparent doing the workshop is, albeit we've been in this JPA for 10 years, I think as Julie, our first public comment stated, 10 years is not really a whole lot of time. And I think from going in that workshop, it was quite apparent that we really didn't seem to me that we've communicated very well as a JPA. We learned a lot about each other. We learned about some of the burdens on Sandpoint, i.e. our HR time, our financial time. We may not be able to go into this authority as it is right now legally. We may need to move forward to a tax district. But what we can do is we can modify the JPA. I think from the workshop and the meeting here tonight, we've heard from the firefighters. We've heard from our residents. They work better together. We train better together. We communicate better together. We share a common community risk with fire, regardless of where those fires are. I think Julie also said it too, fires don't know boundaries, right? And we are better as a group, as what I've heard from all of you right now. And we don't need to go rewrite this whole thing. We need to fix the JPA. We are currently fully staffed from what it sounds like. I know that's been a big issue. We've only been keeping the slider data here for what, the last fiscal year, right? So for 10 years with this JPA, and we're looking at making, I think Chief Armstrong made a really great point about data influenced versus data decision making. And it feels like to me, we got into this spot because we started keeping data and we looked at the sliders and we started talking about how much time it was taking from finance and from HR. And we sit down, we have the workshop, and then we're ready to make a vote without actually looking to change the JPA on where we can take off some of that burden. If we need to hire somebody else, do we need to pay more into the pot for the JPA? There's several different ways that we can get around that. I think pulling out of the JPA, obviously we have increased cost of purchasing more equipment that we don't technically have right now, or that we share, or we take the cost burden out of it because we do share equipment with the other districts. I think we've heard, and I think I can agree that Sandpoint itself does have, I think, the greatest risk in terms of our buildings, and albeit we might have those inspected, we do live on top of each other. We've got restaurants and businesses right underneath residential as well. Fires have the ability to move. I think many of us who were here during the Bridge and First Street fire and the damage that caused, as well as we were down at City Beach and we couldn't get up Bridge Street. The Seasons folks couldn't get down Bridge Street one way or another. We have a common goal in this community when it comes to fighting fires. I'm deathly afraid that if we were to get out of this and we all go back to our corners in our own district, we heard it at the workshop, we jeopardize, or we run into the risk of potential personalities stopping us from working together, from training together. We've heard politically, if someone doesn't like somebody, you don't spend a lot of time working with that other fire department. I believe that to be true. I appreciate that each of the firefighters can bounce seamlessly to each of the places, whether you started in Sandpoint and you now work in Sagal or are considered a Sagal employee. I'd also like to understand what what is the strategy? What are the benchmarks for us if we move out of the JPA? Is it to be cheaper? Is it to have a greater level of service? Is it to run less employees? Is it so that it's not a staff headache, right? I really go back to community risk, and we all share that same community risk. And we've got our chief, Gilcrease, right now is working on a community risk assessment with working with some of the firefighters. I was able to read a couple of those. Really gives you an idea on what the level of staffing is that we need, where some of our hot spots are, no pun intended, in terms of the city and the property values. I tend to believe with regionalization, and I know that can be a bad word at sometimes with anything that we do, but the success of all of our communities around us make us successful, right? As a whole, right? When we want employees for my business to come up into this area, sometimes they need to live in Sagal or over by West Side or in Ponderay for us to be there. And I really think we're looking at a public safety thing. Again, I think I would be willing to motion right now that we continue the JPA at least through the fiscal year. We have a champion in Chief Armstrong, Deputy Chief Armstrong, that will continue to take a look at potential of an authority. If that can't be done, I think enhancing the JPA. If that can't be done, we modify the JPA so that this group stays together and we prioritize community safety over anything else that we're here for tonight. Thank you.
Lives of our fire.
Thank you,
fire crews.
Councilman Dick. I resonate with a lot of what you said, and I want to just, you had one question I want to address, which is what are the benchmark of the benefits? And I can tell you right now, imagine having a fire truck and you're trying to get to the fire and you push down on the gas and it only goes 20 miles an hour. That's what I feel like right now when my HR, I'm trying to hire, you know, significant numbers of positions, and literally 12 hours a day, our HR manager is giving me everything she has based on her what's on her plate. So I don't have, and finance is the same. I don't have the throughput, even though we're getting paid, I don't have the horsepower and capacity that I need to run the city right now. It's very difficult. I didn't want to bring this up, but we have staff in this room that are working so many hours that they gave up 4 weeks of paid time off in the last 2 years because they can't take it because the workload is too much. And they're specialists, so you can't just hire a part-time person to do their job because they're a specialist. So for the benchmark, for me, the bright line, the red line is whatever comes out of this, Sandpoint can't burden itself with the cost and capacity constraints to serve as the authority for this larger area, hundreds of square miles. You know, I was hired and elected as the mayor of Sandpoint for the Sandpoint residents and some business owners who live in Sandpoint. That's, in my mind, my number one priority is to respond to them. So I like where you're going with at least alternatives. Would a 1 year or end of the fiscal year give us time to explore further? That's one of my frustrations is I've been in the job for 3 months and you all know how difficult it is to convene meetings. I mean, we've got comp plan meetings, we've got public hearings, we've got soon to have wastewater plant meetings. It's fairly complex and demanding to bring 7 people together, nonetheless, 7 people plus 2 other boards to have discussion. So there is a bandwidth and a limitation, and it's why I am very supportive of going to the voters with a fire district to alleviate us from this situation. But just my comments on where you're headed with an extension. What I'd love to avoid is being pigeonholed into making a decision that gives us few other options.
Mr. Mayor.
Councilman Welker.
So Justin, I hear you suggesting we extend JPA at least through the fiscal year. But I keep coming back to Deputy Chief Armstrong's presentation, and we have a lot of Selkirk firefighters in the room. If you're a Selkirk firefighter, can you just put your hand up, please? First of all, thank you very much. We really appreciate you, but keep it up, keep it up, keep it up, please. If you're happy being a City of Sandpoint employee and are satisfied with the status quo of JPA, keep your hand up. Because we've gotten lots of emails in the red line.
Two different questions.
Okay, are you happy? Are you happy being a City of Sandpoint employee? Keep your hand up. So that's the problem. Continuing JPA means 27 firefighters continue to be City of Sandpoint employees. And we've heard for years how unhappy they are being City of Sandpoint employees. There's not currently a mechanism to allocate $1.3 million of taxpayer revenue to a third party so that they can go be an employee of an authority. It doesn't exist, but that's the path we've heard for months now that they want to go down. And the solution is a district.
Can I just excuse me? I just want to
Yeah, we can't really.
And I'm going to interrupt for a moment. That was just an anecdotal poll. There was no evidence or anything introduced on that. That was more of a rhetorical question.
Yeah.
And I'm just making the record of that.
Thank you, Zach.
I have to say that that's not,
Councilwoman
it's
Duquette.
2 different things you're asking them.
Right.
And so one of them
So
needs to respond.
No, this is a time for council.
This is not the time for audience participation.
Well, okay, but you asked, he asked
He
for
did.
them.
I apologize.
Okay.
I could have made the point without asking for audience participation. And that point is, and I don't think this is a surprise to anybody up here, overwhelmingly Selkirk firefighters are not satisfied being City of Sandpoint employees.
If that's their,
In fact, that was a slide in Deputy
if
Chief
that's
Armstrong's
all,
presentation.
if that's their alternative, they want to be a group is what I've got. And I've talked to quite a few of them. That's what they want. They want to stay as a group. However, they move forward. As I have understood, speaking to several, they would like to go forward. So when you ask that question, it doesn't appear they'd be happy to just be now a Sandpoint employee while the other districts go do their
But
thing.
if we continue to remain in the JPA, all Selkirk firefighters will remain City of Sandpoint employees until
That's-
something else comes along and replaces it.
And that's the idea, is to get something else to come along to take the place of it,
So,
which I think
I
Justin.
challenge my
better than I
fellow
do.
council members to ask themselves, are you going to be comfortable in the not too distant future committing a quarter of our tax revenues to an independent third party?
I'd like to respond to that,
Please.
Mr. Mayor.
Councilman, Schreiber.
So I've heard from two different people now that you're comfortable adding a new tax burden to our constituents, but not comfortable if that tax money goes through our hands. To me, we're here to look out for our constituents, and advocating for a new taxing district is no different. We're giving it to somebody else to manage, whether it's through our budget or through a separate district.
Except it's up to it's up to the voters.
Yeah,
The taxing
just a
district
couple
is-
clarifications. I appreciate the comment, Councilman Schreiber. Not advocating putting it to the voters first and foremost. As a resident who would vote, I would vote for it. But secondly, the thing that I want to make at least clear is that one of the reasons I like that model is because when I look at all of our other needs in Sandpoint, and I've said this several times in the last 3 months, $80 to $100 million for a new wastewater treatment plant, $20+ million to fix our roads, $15 to $20 million to fix the water system. I don't know what fantasy world people have been living in Sandpoint for the last bunch of years, but there's no money to do all of that. So the taxing district allows the general fund of Sandpoint to remain whole. And it is a question to the voters, do they want enhanced, improved service? But maintaining our general fund dollars to allocate towards these critical elements of public health, safety, and welfare, that's my focus.
Yeah, and I understand all of that, and I appreciate that, and I would support that as well. What I'm saying is that at the end of the day, $1.5 million of Sandpoint taxpayer money is going to an organization outside of the city of Sandpoint to provide fire protection service. Whether it goes through our budget or not, Sandpoint taxpayers will be paying for that, and the city of Sandpoint will not be administering.
Under a fire district.
Under a fire authority or under a new fire district that encompasses the entire.
Fire authority, and from what I've heard, I don't understand why we're talking about it, because it's not a legal mechanism to do
So
that.
call it an enhanced JPA. Can we do that?
An outside entity in which we give our fire budget to administer for us, or a separate tax district. So either way, we don't have any control over it. And so I don't understand how you could advocate for one and not the other. The only difference is an extra $1.5 million that Sandpoint taxpayers have to pay.
Would it be staffing as well, time of staff?
It's the voters get to choose one.
that-
The other is us giving our taxpayers dollars to voluntarily, without them having any say in the matter, besides a public forum, which we know have great turnout, right? I mean, putting it to voters allows them to make that decision. An enhanced JPA in which we siphon off a quarter of our general fund to a third party. It's not fiduciarily responsible.
The voters elected us to make these decisions, these
Correct.
hard
And
decisions.
I can tell you how I
And-
would what decision I would make when it comes to 25% of our tax revenue.
We know, we have heard that.
It's for the city of Sandpoint to control that.
In that case,
And a
Councilman,
JPA has an expiration date, a taxing district does not. So if the JPA does not work out, we can end that. Whereas if the voters vote in a new taxing district, they're stuck with that.
Councilman Schreiber, I think it's worth, just for the purpose of conversation on this. The other thing that I think would be something we'd have to face and address and come to a good decision on is right now, looking strictly at the capacity and skill set of the city of Sandpoint and looking prior to this, what has been a 10-year experiment that's had some positive elements and a lot of challenges. We have the capacity. We have a model. The city of Sandpoint ran a fire department with exceptional fire coverage and services until 2014. And we know how to do that because our neighbors and because Bonner County has chosen to allow land use codes that I work on, by the way, in my private sector, allow you to split property into 5 acres or 10 acres and densify these rural areas, demanding more services, demanding more risk. That's not my problem as a mayor of Sandpoint. My problem and my focus is the residents of Sandpoint. Our employees are number 2, but the residents and what they need and want and what we can afford to give them when we're facing massive deficits for our wastewater plant replacements, our streets, our water lines. I mean, that's what we got to balance.
I'm with you. We do have tons of draws on our budget, but this doesn't save us any money. We're not going to suddenly be able to fund any of the things that you just listed by leaving the JPA.
Acknowledged. That's getting back.
It's not the firefighters' fault that we don't have a public works director.
Correct.
So our HR director is overburdened because we're trying to hire an entirely new staff. It's not their fault.
No, but the being involved in the JPA is taking up 30% of finance and HR time.
Yeah, and if we need to add more employees, just like we are in every other department, let's add more employees. And if we need to contract out specialists, like we already do, let's contract out specialists.
I think it's a great discussion.
Well, that's what we're trying to have, I think.
Yeah.
It's a great.
Sorry, I'm getting a little worked up here.
Oh, I love it. I love it. It's good stuff.
And Councillor Dick, I appreciate the way you shared my thoughts much better. I'm not very good at expressing at this point, but at one point you've got more experience than I for sure. At one point you started to make a motion to, I don't know.
I would be willing to make a motion, but I think Joel would like to speak.
Mr. Mayor, I mean, there's a lot obviously that can be said. I'm gonna let, I know Councilor Dick's gonna go, but it may be not a big deal to somebody, but I just want to make sure. I think it was Mr. Wheat, the comment about special interest. I heard the ego comment and blood on our hands. I know that was specifically directed towards us. Just to be clear, I think he was part of an organization or that he saw special interest get involved. I didn't hear him say personally that we have special interests involved. I just want to be clear about that. So he's not misunderstood. It was the organization he was a part of. He saw things like that happen. So maybe not a big deal. I didn't take it personally like that. So
Before you make, or is there any comment from the left here? One roll. And not left in terms of political, my left, if you're listening.
Okay, yeah, let's make sure. So I've written down, I've listened, and so I hear a lot about, my duty for safety, keep Sandpoint safe. I like the idea of keeping my neighbors safe. I've also heard a lot about tax dollars. I've heard about, fire taxing districts. I've heard about us having a great team, as Selkirk Fire. And what I would like to put out there to the rest of the counselors also, I've heard about extracting ourselves as a city. And what I keep coming back to is that I've been waiting for this for 10 years. So 10 years now, we finally have a champion. Well, I heard about taxing districts when this all started. That's where it was going to head. I thought it was a great idea. But if these other entities, I don't care what you call it, outside of fire taxing district, there's no formed entity. that means it's extremely risky for Sandpoint to make that decision to an entity that's not proven, that different boards are coming forward to us and saying. So there's no guarantee that anything's going to happen. And then I would also like to point out that this is the first time when there's a risk that Sandpoint is extracting themselves, that I've seen anybody get motivated and this room be full the way it is full. And I believe that on some levels, to maintain that motivation, Sandpoint needs to extract itself to keep the motivation happening. And when the entity is formed and when the entity proves itself, and if the entity continues to welcome Sandpoint to make it stronger again, then I think that's the way it potentially needs to happen. Because I've been waiting for 10 years for this stronger entity to be created. So nobody has taken hold of that and run with it like I was promised year after year after year after year. And now I'm in the same place again. It's not a simple decision. It's not an easy decision. I've been told tonight I will have blood on my hands if I choose the wrong way, but I also have to support the taxpayers. It's not easy what we do up here. I don't expect any sympathy. But I wanted you to understand what I've heard and understand what I've seen. So I'd share that with the council.
Thank you, Councilwoman Rule.
Mr. Mayor, I did have some
Councilman
comments
Shriver?
beyond.
Come again?
What'd you say? I did have some comments beyond just responding to other discussion.
Sure.
First off, I wanted to thank everybody for coming out tonight. Sitting through this long meeting. I do want to thank and acknowledge that our city staff has been putting in really long hours to accomplish what we're accomplishing. And I do want to see change to support them in the ways that they need. I also want to thank Deputy Chief Armstrong and our partner fire districts for their presentation and for starting the legwork of moving on to that next step. We finally have somebody who's getting traction. And I want to thank the firefighters for, sharing your insight, because you could build a mountain out of what I don't know about how to run a fire district. And so I think we really need to lean on our boots on the ground. And when there's a resounding voice saying this is the best way to do it, I think we should listen. And in January, this council entrusted me to be the representative on the JPA, and I've taken that very seriously. And I have frantically tried to learn as much as possible about, how a fire protection district works, what a JPA even is, and frankly, all the backstory about why we are all sitting in this room right now. How did we get here? And I'm trying to find the root causes. A lot of that seems to be staffing, and I want to applaud our partner districts for committing to putting a levy out to the voters specifically for the purpose of bringing on more firefighters. I believe that the JPA provides a bigger pool of potential employees so that when you do have firefighters that go on leave or get injured or retire, you have a bigger pool to fill in. And if we can, in our current JPA, increase our staffing so that we don't run at minimum levels all the time. I have more notes. Hold on.
Can I interrupt you on that last point, Councilman Schreiber?
Yeah.
Based on your attendance the other night at the board meetings, is it your understanding that the offer or goodwill intention to put a levy out in Sago and West Side this fall has basically passed? There's not enough time to do that, or is there still?
No, there's absolutely discussion on Monday night about putting out a levy in the fall.
Thank you.
And I've seen the written commitment that they have given to the city of Sandpoint to do so. And I would also like to note that I spoke with one of the signatories of the letter that you deemed to be notice that they were withdrawing from the JPA, and he did not intend that to be the intent of that letter. So, he's also here if he wants to speak for himself, but, one last thing that, well, I guess, I do want to acknowledge the unified culture of the JPA, and, that's a big reason, if you look at why McCall and Ketchum are moving towards JPA, is for that exact reason. And I think a good analogy would be if you had to undergo surgery and you had the choice between two doctors who see each other once a year at a conference, or a team of doctors that are working side by side every single day, what would you choose? And then the last thing, and maybe this is just because I've lived my entire life under the threat of catastrophic fire, but I think it's worth mentioning that we're in a multi-year drought, although it doesn't seem like it tonight, maybe. We're experiencing abnormally warm temperatures, and we're going into our hot and dry season with well below average snowpack. So for us to throw our fire system into chaos right now because of an arbitrary and self-imposed deadline, I think is irresponsible. And so I would like to make a motion to extend our current JPA contract through June 30th of 2025 and remove the requirement for a 60-day notice of withdrawal.
Just for clarification, remove the notice, just for this current year, or the motion that's basically we're meeting tonight, not out of the actual JPA agreement.
Remove it from the actual JPA agreement.
So that can't exactly be done tonight. First and foremost, we need to, that's a provision of the contract that we need to work with the other districts. I'm sure they'd be agreeable to it. I'm not trying to say they wouldn't. But we wouldn't necessarily be able to include that into the motion tonight. But you could certainly direct staff to move into that direction.
So the motion reconfigured would be to
I would like
move
to
staff to
table the item of withdrawing from the JPA and direct staff to rewrite the contract such that the duration is through June 30th of 2025, and remove the language requiring 60-day notice of withdrawal, and present that to the other JPA partners for approval.
there a second?
Mr. Mayor, clarifying question then, what would be the time frame to withdraw? You're just eliminating it, right? You're eliminating the 60-day notice, but extending it for a year.
Correct.
But are you putting in something else in
If we don't
terms
come
of?
up with a solution in the year, then the JPA dies.
Solution so that would also require negotiation with between the parties, as is the way I read the contract is if we don't provide the notice within the 60 days, it gets automatically renewed. And so it might be wise to provide some sort of notice provision in there so that we can avoid a situation essentially where all of a sudden it's a week before the JPA lapses and nobody's, I mean, we're doing that right now, but at least we have a 60-day buffer to figure out how things are going to unfold should we decide to withdraw. So that 60-day provision, if we're extending it a year, that 60-day provision really does help.
Okay, well, I would amend my motion to remove that part.
But you still want to extend the year.
Correct.
To table and then instruct staff to extend the JPA agreement.
Maybe this isn't implied in your motion, but you said if it's not resolved within a year, what is that you're expecting to be resolved?
Maybe we can get a second and then enter discussion.
If we have a second, did we get?
I don't understand what the motion is.
Okay.
So
Extend JPA.
I'm not
June
comfortable
30th
with somebody
next year.
second. Can we restate
Can we
that?
try to reword? How do you do that? Can we try to reword amongst us that motion?
Yes, I would ask that we seek clarity on what the motion is before we move forward.
So Counselor,
Uh,
what was your first?
Just,
I'm sorry.
Go ahead,
if
Jerry.
I'm out of line.
just a moment. Thank you, Councilwoman Duquette. Councilman Schreiber, can you try one more time to clarify and?
Okay, so I do need to table the resolution that's on the.
No, I don't
agenda
think a
item?
motion, I mean,
We don't need
think a
to?
motion is ever
Okay.
formally made.
I would move to instruct staff to extend the current JPA contract duration through June 30th of 2025.
Through or two?
So
through. I believe it's probably two.
if we wanted to,
Everyone clear on the motion?
no,
Do,
I understand the timeline.
right, but
Yeah,
then to produce a more,
no, that discussion will be
that
the
would
second.
come up
Okay,
during
sorry,
discussion.
okay.
But the motion is
Okay,
to
after the
extend the
motion.
current
Trying to make it a better motion.
Joint Powers Authority agreement to 2025 staff to engage and make that happen. Or at least,
Seconding doesn't mean it's passed, so I'll second, so we can have a
Thank you.
discussion.
thank you, Councilman. Motion by Councilman Schreiber, second by Councilman Spiro. This will be a roll call vote or just a
Discussion.
regular
Discussion,
A discussion.
please.
That's what I wrote.
Yeah.
This is
So
hard
now,
work.
Welker, Mr. Mayor, if I may,
Go ahead, Councilman.
Councilman
Spiro.
Welker,
I was just,
fix what?
my follow-up for you, Kyle, was, are there any benchmarks you expect to accomplish by then? Or are we just kicking the can down the road for another year? I'm unclear on what the purpose of extending for 1 year is.
Because we just started a really complex effort to come up with a better solution to our JPA that we haven't had any traction on in 10 years. And so that gives us 1 year to figure out if we can make this better or if we have to withdraw. And in a year, instead of 3 years, which would be the standard renewal, we get 1 year to decide if Sandpoint wants to stay. But that gives the people who are working diligently to try and come up with a better solution and trying to pass levies so that they can increase their staffing to do that.
Yeah, Mr. Mayor. Oh, go ahead.
Councilman-
I saw you. You're-
Councilwoman Rule.
Just for conversation, I've heard it said tonight that, we don't want a revised, maybe not exactly that word, JPA model, but enhanced, sorry. And maybe, I don't know if they meant that or not. They only get 3 minutes. I understand that pressure. I never heard any of us say we weren't open to this idea of an enhanced JPA. You know,
I think that's accurate. I think-
I hear that some of us, if not all of us, were frustrated with the current JPA model, and I've even heard that from the JPA themselves. So I just want to be clear that I never heard any of us say that we're opposed to an idea of an enhanced JPA, which would be this year extension to discuss, yes, in a sense, it's kicking the can down the road, but hopefully to a better solution. But I want to be clear too, I do believe if we went to a Sandpoint only fire, we could get the job done. I'm not opposed to that either, but I do hear what I believe Councilman Dick was going to talk about, but Councilman Schreiber, let's have this discussion if we can make this better. And I think even though we didn't get another workshop like maybe many wanted in this room, I personally believe sometimes when you get that 3 minutes, you're able to get to the point a lot quicker, maybe more passionately, where we can hear better. I don't accept some of the comments made tonight that were more personal. But I can sympathize and understand your frustration because I don't know what it's like to be you guys. And to some degree, you guys don't know what it's like to be us, and that's okay. We can respect our differences in that. So, which is why we're here tonight. But I just want to be clear that I'm not against an enhancement, but I'm also not against a Sandpoint only, but there's 6 of us here to continue this discussion. And I just thought I'd throw that out there, but Councilman Walker, I heard it.
Mr. Mayor.
I saw Councilwoman
sorry, go ahead, Deb.
Rule down there. first.
Mr. Mayor, if I may, I would like to know, if more about, it's always been very vague historically. Better, what does better mean? What does enhanced mean? So I like the word benchmark. I like the word, I'll give you a little story just for fun. So, my kids ski raced as small children and they were taught by their head coach, make your goals obtainable. Don't say you're gonna win the big championship at the end of the year. What are the goals that you're gonna have in place to win that big championship at the end of the year? I'm gonna get better at looking 3 gates down the hill because I don't normally do that. I'm gonna get better at my left footer because that one's worse than my right footer. And how are you gonna do that? So each week, what is that attainable goal? I'm just so absolutely done with kicking the can down the road without benchmarks, obtainable goals. What are we doing here? I'm not convinced that a year from now, it will be any different than it has been over the past 10 years. I know we've got a champion, I know we've got passionate people in the room, but laying out this motion that you've laid out, I would need you to thoroughly amend it.
Well, I mean, I guess I would say that since you have been the one that's been dealing with this for 10 years, perhaps you could advise us on what the best benchmarks would be.
Well,
I've only been here for 2 months.
I would say that I'm not an expert at developing tax fire districts. I'm not an expert and I'm not the boots on the ground and I'm not the people who do the job. And those experts are the people that need to make the goals. I was not my child trying to win the championship. He had to make his own goals. I can't make his goals for him. So it's not what I do. If you want me to fix your back, I'll set up some goals. I do that every day. I write goals for my patients and they're obtainable. I'm going to do this in 3 visits. I'm going to do this in 2 weeks. I'm going to do this in 6, and I am going to have you back to doing whatever you want in 12 weeks. Granted, there's different diagnoses. Sometimes some people take a year. And so that's how I'm looking at this for you, because I've just, heard we're going to be better. It's going to be great. I think the whole JPA in my idea was because fire wanted to move toward an independent taxing district. And the impression was given that entities could come together and then nobody ran with the torch. And if we want to go to Boise and create new laws so a fire authority can happen, easily that's going to take 3 to 5 years if it were to ever happen. But those things, there's already been 10 years happening. So that's enough. I think you guys understand where I'm coming from.
Yeah. Mr. Mayor.
Go
if
ahead,
you might,
Councilman.
and maybe for you, Councilperson Schreiber, maybe a low-hanging fruit benchmark that might satisfy some of what Mr. Mayor has spoken to us is a benchmark that the JPA addresses the time and capacity of our finance department as well as our HR. And whether we're adding or we're being compensated or we're bringing someone else into that office, maybe from one of those other districts, to be able to help to lighten up the load on what Sandpoint's taking right now.
Yeah, I think that's a great idea.
Mr. Mayor.
Councilman Wilker?
Yeah, I'm actually just going to respond to Joel's comment. I just want to make it clear on the record, to the extent that an enhanced JPA is a euphemism for a fire authority, I am opposed to that. I am never going to be comfortable committing a quarter of our taxpayers' revenues, our general fund budget. It's 25% of our general fund budget goes into fire right now. I'm never going to feel comfortable giving that to a third party to administer on the behalf of our constituents. That's our job. So I'm putting that on the record because I feel like this term enhanced
JPA.
enhanced JPA is being used as euphemism for give us your money and let us run the show. And a taxing district, I think, is a fantastic idea. So a benchmark I would recommend is a year from now, have it on the ballot. Let's put it out there. A year should be enough time to get this out to voters. And if it fails, that's.
I would not agree to that benchmark because I don't see how that's any different. A taxing district
As we
is
leave the choice
also
to the voters.
The people's vote.
Yeah, and if it doesn't work, then they have to repeal the tax district and go all the way back through rebuilding 3 separate tax districts. At the end of the day, somebody else would be administering the money.
So I think maybe there's some disagreement on the council about our comfort level with handing a quarter of our general fund budget over to an independent authority.
I don't think there is because you clearly stated that you were comfortable with that. as long as it was an independent tax district.
That's not our tax revenues that we're.
It's because
It's
That's voters,
Sandpoint
that's
constitu-
voters
the people vote.
consciously choosing to pay more taxes to have a better enhanced fire service that covers a broader geographical area than our 4.7 square miles. There's a big difference.
As opposed to us actually having a say in how that money is distributed. And if it doesn't work out, we can actually withdraw from it.
Which is what we're here for tonight.
Right.
But I hear you saying, excuse me, Mr. Mayor, that if we do a tax district and we don't like it, we can't pull out. Is that, I hear you correctly?
Yeah, that's correct. And we also
not
would
we
have
any- it's
zero
not we.
ability to.
It's not we.
To dictate the budget or the operations. It would be a completely separate entity.
Like Bonner
Whereas
County
at least
EMS.
we could decide the level of service, that we wanted to pay for. If we wanted to increase our staffing, we could, whereas with a separate tax district, this body right here would have no power whatsoever.
That would, sounds wonderful.
Mr. Mayor,
Thank you, Councilman Schreiber. Councilwoman Rule, you have some comments?
Zach,
Questions, discussion?
if the tax voters, getting late. If the voters voted in a separate fire taxing district on the ballot, how do they undo that? Do they again go back to the ballot if they feel it is not working and vote to dismantle it?
Correct. So to create a separate taxing district, it takes a referendum. Off the top of my head, I think it takes a supermajority, but I haven't double checked that statute. So I think it takes 66% of the voters to confirm that to create the new taxing district. Similarly, it would take the same to dissolve the taxing district. And so that's how it would be dissolved. Now, that would leave a vacuum of services, and there's who knows how that would play out. But yes, that's how you dissolve the taxing district. And to clarify, the city of, if the new taxing district gets created, that would dissolve the fire department within the city of Sandpoint. And so the city of Sandpoint residents wouldn't be paying taxes to the city of Sandpoint for the purposes of fire services. They would essentially, that money, it's like paying state taxes and federal taxes and city taxes. You'd be paying it to a separate governmental entity.
Is that your understanding, Mr. Mayor?
They wouldn't be paying their taxes for fire services. No, they'd be paying it for, so we could fix our roads and our
Right.
water lines and our other issues.
How would they get fire services?
Through the taxing district.
Because
They'd
they
be
voted
paying
it
an
in.
additional $1.5
Yes, it would be an additional, and whether it's $1.5 million, we don't know because it's fairly complex to figure out right now. If you look at how the two other taxing districts are being operated and levied, improved land versus raw land, it's fairly complex and involved to put this together. So
Does that keep the three together as they want?
it would actually open it up to north side. It would, so Bonner County EMS right now, it's a taxing district and it covers another umbrella that covers towns, rural areas, unincorporated areas. It would be a new umbrella that provided fire and emergency services. Wherever that umbrella line is drawn, and I guess I just also throw out another thought that I often like is we have the ability to do a non-binding, ballot measure a year from now. We could certainly put it out to the Sandpoint voters next fall and see if they have an opinion on whether we should continue or go back to a Sandpoint only fire department. That would, but your points there, yes, for me, in terms of benchmarks and goals, it's how do I get back the full bandwidth of the staff that the city of Sandpoint had prior to this experiment. Because like I said, you can't just add a part of a finance. Right now, Sarah does the budgeting for the districts, all the A&P and everything else. You can't just add a partial Sarah, right? Because that's very expensive and they wouldn't have a full-time job. You can't train someone to do just what Sarah does. They come as a whole package. So it's got some complexities. In terms of benchmarks though, I was thinking more along the line of, are there gonna be quarterly meetings? Are there going to be, you know, at the first one, are there gonna be specified goals? And what are those goals? What are the measurements? What's the risk assessment say? Do you have some comments, Chief, on what some benchmarks might be?
Not specific benchmarks as it relates to this meeting right now, but I would like to propose that in a month's time, we could give you a set of benchmarks and goals and then have quarterly updates. We could do those at the regular business meeting if you would like. That way we know what our end game is. We're looking for the best option to move forward. And that way you can see progress on a quarterly basis.
I have a question for the chief. Chief, if we were a 9-person department with volunteers, is there any validity in the thought that instead of the current model where we're sliding people to other districts, that the Sandpoint Fire Department would have more bandwidth during non-emergencies to do things in Sandpoint, such as inspections, specialized training, other things like that? Is that?
Not for volunteers. I would say probably, and this was back, before, several years ago when the volunteerism really started to decline, not only in Sandpoint, but nationwide. The majority of your volunteers, they're working during the day, so they're only around at night, for comebacks and things like that. There's not a lot of businesses that will cut volunteer anymore, cut volunteer firefighters loose in the middle of the day to go work accident or what have you. Because they need their people there working. So I couldn't say that it would give us any more bandwidth. It would, of course, if they were able to come back at night and that's when the incidents happen, that's always a force multiplier. But at the same time, the volunteerism right now is 0. So we have to completely build that program. And that would take time.
Thank you. Other council discussion?
Mr. Mayor, just on that volunteer point, I think what I've heard previously was that with the volunteers, time is taken to train them and get them up to speed so they can be a partner, and then they leave or they become engaged in employed and can't. And so I think that's been a problem with volunteers. How you fix that, I don't know. But that's why using the firefighters that we have as a cohesive group has seemed to work for what I've understood from our firefighters. And I have to respect that they're the ones in there. I'm not carrying a 500-pound hose, and I'm not going in a burning building. And I'm there. I want what they want. So can't help it. So I'd like to know exactly what they want, but then they want to continue, it seems, in a functioning
Well, maybe I can.
authority or a agreement or.
What I've heard that they want is more staffing to bring the station staffing up to acceptable levels based on fire code.
And we've got 2 levies going. Or being
I've heard
put out.
discussion of that, yep. I've
And
heard discussion of
Kyle
that.
says they are doing that.
We have written commitment,
Right.
from what I understand.
So that's what I've heard they want, that I've heard they want to stay together, and I,
Okay.
understand that. So yeah, it's almost like I don't want to call it a negotiation, but there's clearly the need for a discussion to understand what both sides are lacking and what they need. And we've had 90 days, less than 80 days to work on this since January 3rd. So it has a drop dead date. There's a motion on the table right now to extend it for a year. And I would be open to further discussion.
And so the benchmark that the chief, do you agree with that benchmark? For, I don't know, for that motion?
Well, I'll jump in. I think those goals need to understand the sticky wicket, the challenges.
Right.
I don't know how I can express them more clearly from this, from my perspectives in terms
I
of
understand. your
bandwidth, but
perspective.
those goals need to reflect the challenges and deficiencies of the JPA as it has existed for the last 10 years and
Which is,
exists today.
which is what they're trying to do. It sounds like they would love to do that also.
I
We
would
would
agree.
all love to have that happen to rid the burden on you and our wonderful staff and to accommodate the family of firefighters that want to continue to work together to prove best services. And it looks like Deputy Chief Armstrong is still here. I don't know if that can that be, can something be
He's-
directed to
He's,
him
he's my employee and the chief's. employee,
for
so-
a benchmark that we're struggling with?
Yeah, I can try to work on it. We've got wastewater, comp plan, zoning, a few other balls in the air, but this is the
But you're not,
challenge.
okay, but you're not having him work on those.
Well, I'm not, I would have the chief instruct him to work on those, yes.
Okay. So that means we're not talking to anybody else again. I don't understand how we do this. You just have to let me know.
My understanding is that it would be a collaborative effort to try to bridge.
Right, but we're trying to get a benchmark to make the motion go so that we can pass it and go home.
And if I could just maybe try to rein in the conversation on
Thank you.
benchmark. So the decision in front of council today is to decide whether to remain in the JPA or not.
Okay.
The motion to extend the JPA for a year, what staff needs to do is go back to the districts and see if they're willing to agree to that. So the decision before council is essentially to table the decision on whether or not to remain in the JPA. And then staff will go and inquire with the districts to see if they are willing to agree to extend the JPA for a year. We will need to do that before the next regular city council meeting,
Okay.
because that would be the last time before the 60-day notice is required to be provided. The benchmarks, that just gets, as far as the purpose, for the purposes of the decision in front of council, adding these benchmarks just adds fuzziness. I wish I had a better word.
Well, it
at my
adds
tongue.
goals, it adds forward motion.
Because then we would need to take those back to the district, we would need to negotiate those, we would need to include them in the contract, and we would need to present a new contract to council for council signature on the 17th. So as far as benchmarks, I think it's important to have this conversation, and I think it's important to have it now. But including them in the motion
Okay.
is difficult.
Okay. Don't these letters from both districts share they want to continue to work through an enhanced, it sounds like they are giving us, yes, they want to do
Yes,
that.
Councilwoman Duquette, I believe that there's
what we're
great
trying-
interest by
Okay,
both parts of the
okay.
district. The conundrum tonight is that there's no legal mechanism to do that, as
Right.
I understood
I
it, so.
understand that also.
But I
Just
think
trying to get
we
that
have
in
willing
there.
partners in Sagal and West Side, if this motion were to pass, to work on this for
Okay.
next year. And we have a engaged and passionate deputy chief who sounds like he's ready to run with that.
Yes. So I guess it's back to the motion.
Councilwoman.
Mr. Mayor, I'd just like to apologize, Zach, thank you for pointing me out. I probably shouldn't have asked for that to become part of the motion. It is a little bit later. I do know better than to try and combine all of them there, so.
So, Mr. Mayor, just,
Councilman Spiro.
I don't know if point of order, the motion is simply to extend it. And that's it. And then we have an in-house discussion of what these benchmarks are gonna be. And really maybe refining what the actual problem is, not that there's gonna be full agreement, because yes, they are the experts on that field, but we may see differently on what the actual issues are. To other entities, they may think it's simple and they're like X, Y, Z, duh, dummies. We're also in a different position here where we're like, well, it's not that simple. So as I hear it, simple motion, if it passes, we have internal discussions, possibly more with, goes to negotiations, and that may fail, it may fail. But we have those discussions and we can refine that. Yes, it's kicking the can down the road. Couple things I want to say before closing. I don't care if it's late, it's what it is. That's why we get paid the big bucks. I respect and completely agree. I think that the conversation should be also having about a taxing district. It goes to the people. We are a republic. So when I hear it goes to the voters, I feel a lot more comfortable with something like that. So Councilman Walker, I respect and appreciate those comments. Absolutely. Councilman Schreiber, and I mean this with all due respect, we are elected to make decisions. And I don't believe you're saying that we don't need to listen to the people, but that comment came off as such, like, well, that's why we're here, because we got voted in. Well, then we don't need to listen to these comments. But we are, because we are a representative republic, and that can get a little muddy on, we do make the final hard decisions, but we still have to listen to the voters. Even if the majority is saying we want this, that doesn't necessarily mean it's the right decision, and that's where we make the difficult decisions. And I'm not trying to belittle you, but it is a difficult position to be in, being on here as long as I have. I wish it were that simple, like we get the final decision and we don't have to listen to the feedback, but we do. And I think it's advantageous of us right now to move forward with your motion of kicking the can down the road to have this discussion. And it is that, and not in a negative sense, but there's more discussion to be had. But I am torn because it is burdensome on our staff, but those are solutions we're gonna try to fix. And maybe Councilwoman Rule, you'll be right. We're a year from now and we literally got nowhere, but it's tough stuff. That's just kind of opening up my mind right now.
Question for Zach. The motion did not include a table. Is that just inferred?
It was inferred. I mean, if we don't decide, if we don't make a decision today, then the motion's not being, or that decision's not being made.
Further discussion?
I just wanted to clarify that my comments were that either one of those solutions, an outside entity would be administering that money. It wasn't that I was opposed to one or that I thought that we should have ultimate power. I'm absolutely open to putting it to the voters. I was just pointing out that either way, somebody outside of this room would be administering those funds.
And I heard that. I just saying the voters put this up to it would feel a lot more comfortable to me than a small group of people, right? I mean, like, I got elected by the voters, not a small entity saying the outcome would have been the same, but at least it was the people who spoke. And I think that's in principle what our country stands for, would be the people deciding. And I feel way more comfortable with that. In some situations, yeah, we're called to make the hard decisions about wastewater treatment plants or parks or things like that. But a taxing district going to the people is a lot more, I would say, in spirit with our country than what we're doing with the park. So.
Fair enough.
Good comments. Any further comments? If not, this will be a roll call vote.
Can we hear the motion again?
Motion is, Melissa, do you want to read that back?
Well, my understanding is, I know we didn't use the word table, but basically we would be making no decision this evening on continuation or leaving the JPA, but that we're tabling it to discuss with the other entities, whether they would agree to extend to June 30, 2025.
That's what I have written down.
Okay.
Staff to reach out to extend the JPA agreement to June 2025, June 30th, 2025.
You ready?
Yep.
Counselor Walker,
No.
Counselor Schreiber,
Yes.
Counselor Sparrow,
Yes.
Counselor Dick,
Yes.
Counselor Rule,
No.
Counselor Duquette.
Yes.
Mr. Mayor, motion passes.
Motion is passed. Thank you everyone for your time tonight. One final comment before we adjourn. We have, or I have hired a planning and community development director. We had a excellent pool of candidates and I am excited to announce that Councilman Welker is going to be our new planning and community development director effective April 8th. I want to, congratulate you for stepping up. I think as in that role, you will bring tremendous community knowledge, passion, energy, and certainly excellence to to that department. Thank you for considering that, and thank you for your service on the council. And I'd certainly just pass it on to you right now if you want to make any comments.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, for the opportunity. I've been serving the people of Sandpoint as elected official for 2.5 years. And before that, I spent 2.5 years on Planning and Zoning Commission, which was a crash course in our city ordinances around Titles 9 through 12. I had the honor of serving as the chairman of that commission for over a year before I joined council. And I've been an active member of the nonprofit community as a volunteer over the years, board member and an executive director. And I feel like my experience in Sandpoint over 20 years of being a part-time resident and 7 years of being a full-time resident has prepared me well to address the major challenges we face with growth and development, recreation, open spaces, trails, parks, all the things that this wonderful new department encompasses. So thank you, Mr. Mayor, and thank you to my fellow council members. I'm sorry to be leaving you, but I'm certain, that Jeremy's got a great replacement in mind for the city council seat. And this will be my last council meeting, I believe.
Well, you've got some big shoes to fill there. For the public, Jason's going to be managing and overseeing all current and long-range planning, all of our building officials, our Parks and Rec department, as well as all of our commissions and the staff that runs those commissions. So he'll be touching things like our Parks Master Plan, our comprehensive plan, our zoning rewrite, all the slog of ongoing development, touching on obviously how we get around and interact in Sandpoint through those multimodal and other master plans. It's going to be great to have someone and have this capacity at City Hall. It takes a lot off my plate. I believe there's somewhere between 7 and 9 direct reports you're going to be managing. And we've also hired a Parks and Rec supervisor. Jason Wiley departed in December, and thrilled after a lengthy process to have that employee coming on April 15th, I believe. It's going to help Cammie and the Parks Department out tremendously. In mid-April, we also have a permit tech coordinator coming on to assist with planning and building. And yeah, all in all, we're starting to fill out the team, and it's I can't tell you, HR manager said in the 9 months she's been here, it's the first time they've filled this many positions. So I've been pushing everyone really hard. Thank you, staff. And I'd open it up to council members to give any parting words to Councilman Welker.
But do we get any other names?
I will be bringing in my appointment, and hopefully you will love that person and you will
No, I mean
confirm them.
names for those 2 positions that you
Oh,
felt the
I'm
parties.
so bad with it's
Okay, you are bad with
I believe
names.
I know one's another Kate, and that's the supervisor, rec supervisor, and the maybe Julie, is that right?
Are they local? I just.
No,
curious.
no.
And I don't know them probably. Okay.
Two Katies.
Oh,
And we
fun.
already have a Kate,
Oh,
so,
my.
and the former rec supervisor was Jason, so.
Yeah.
And I knew it's
Mr. Mayor.
Councilman Sparrow.
Yeah, I feel like when I want to say something, I should. I nominated you, Councilman Welker, to be council president. Although there was seniority on the table here, I believe that your enthusiasm, your knowledge, your wealth of knowledge, that you deserve that position is why I nominated you, and you did get it. And so I have a lot of respect for you, even though we have differences and disagree. This is an unorthodox way to get out, but happy for you, and you will be missed. But I'm glad that still get to work with you in one way or another. So actually, maybe your boss to some degree.
Yeah, you will.
That's great.
Thank you.
Mr. Mayor,
Councilwoman Rule.
I just would like to also thank Jason for his commitment to the community. I wish he would stay on the council, because I think, I mean, I know he's going to do great in the new job, but I think he brings the discussion to another level in the way that he looks at the details. And I really appreciate that piece. And I think it allows us to have much deeper conversation. So I will definitely miss his thoughts on DICE.
Thanks, Deb.
Wish you luck.
Councilwoman Rule, I hope to match that characteristic.
There will be no match for
if
Dave.
not-
He's one of a kind.
Thank you.
And they won't be as tall, I'm sure of that.
Thank you, guys.
Mr. Mayor,
Councilman
congratulations,
Schreiber.
Jason.
Thanks, Scott.
And yeah, I look forward to working with you on lots of different exciting projects.
Thanks.
Short but sweet, I say.
Everybody does need to say something.
The
please.
time was short.
Let's let all these people go home, please.
So, just,
outta here.
council members will be electing a new council president at our next meeting, and I'll be bringing you a nomination to fill Councilman Welker's seat. And, everyone in the audience and online, thank you so much for bearing with us during this process. It's a process, and I am sincerely hopeful the apple and the orange are the people holding hands. I'm hopeful we can all get there. So, again, thank you for your time. And with that, I adjourn the meeting at 44 PM.